Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Daniel Rockwell, and I've been a park ranger for 17 years now. Most of that time, I've worked the cliffs and gorges of South Cumberland State Park in Tennessee. When people ask me what I do for a living, I tell them I help folks who get stuck on rock faces. What I don't tell them is how many times I've pulled dead bodies out of those same places. Savage Gulf is what we call the Big Gorge system here. It's 15,000 acres of deep cuts in the earth, with waterfalls that drop 200 feet straight down. The Cherokee used to call it the place of the dead. I always thought that was just because it's dangerous. Lots of ways to fall and die if you're not careful. I was wrong about that. Before I tell you what really happened in June of 1984, you need to know I'm not the kind of guy who believes in ghost stories. I've got advanced rope rescue training. I've pulled over 200 people off cliff faces. When someone tells me they saw something weird, I look for the real reason. Loose rock, bad equipment, or just plain human error. That's what I thought was happening when Janet Mills fell. Janet was teaching a rock climbing class that Tuesday morning. She'd been climbing for 12 years, knew every route in Savage Gulf like her own backyard. The group she was teaching was small, just 4 people learning the basics on an easy wall we call Turtle Rock. I was about a mile away when I heard the screaming. By the time I got there, Janet was lying on a ledge about 50 feet down from where she'd started. Her students were up top, looking scared and confused. One of them, a college kid named Tommy, was the first to talk to me. "She just fell," he kept saying. "She was showing us how to set an anchor, and then she just fell." Janet was conscious but hurt bad. Broken leg for sure, maybe some ribs too. While I set up the rescue rope, I asked her why it happened. "Something pushed me," she said. Her face was white with pain, but her eyes were clear. "I felt hands on my back, Daniel. Cold hands." I've heard lots of things from hurt climbers. Pain makes people think all sorts of stuff that isn't real. But Janet wasn't the type to imagine things. Still, I looked at her gear. That's when I saw the rope. The climbing rope she'd been using was cut, not frayed from rubbing against rock, cut clean through with something sharp. The cut was so smooth it looked like someone had used a knife on it. "Janet," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "did anyone else handle your rope today?" "No," she said. "I checked all my gear this morning like always. That rope was perfect, Daniel. I swear it was perfect." I got her up to the top and called for a helicopter to take her to the hospital. While we waited, I looked around the area where she'd fallen. The rock was solid limestone. No loose pieces that could have cut the rope. No sharp edges either. But there was something else. In the dirt near the cliff edge, I found footprints. Big ones. Bigger than any of the climbing students. They were deep in the soft earth, like whoever made them was really heavy. The weird thing was, the prints just stopped at the edge of the cliff. Like whoever made them had walked straight off into empty air. I measured the prints. Size 13 boots, but with a strange pattern I'd never seen before. Deep heel marks, like the person had been standing on their toes. The fog started rolling in while we waited for the helicopter. That was odd because it was June, hot and sunny. Fog in Savage Gulf usually only happens in the fall and winter, but this fog was thick and cold, and it moved wrong. Instead of flowing down into the gorge like fog should, it seemed to climb up the cliff walls. When I looked down into the gorge through the fog, I could swear I saw shapes moving around down there. Dark shapes that didn't quite look like trees or rocks. The helicopter pilot almost couldn't land because of the fog. He kept saying over the radio that his instruments were acting up, showing readings that didn't make sense. After Janet was gone, I spent another hour looking around the cliff area. That's when I found the second set of cut gear. One of the students had left a backpack near the edge. Inside, I found a climbing harness with the straps cut clean through, just like Janet's rope. Nobody had touched that backpack except its owner, and the cuts were fresh. I hiked back to my truck as the fog got thicker. By the time I reached the parking area, I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. The temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees, and there was a smell in the air I couldn't place. Sweet and rotten at the same time, like flowers left too long in water. That night, I called Janet at the hospital. She was doing better, but she had something else to tell me. "Daniel," she said, "I keep thinking about what I felt right before I fell. Those hands on my back. They weren't just cold. They were soft, like they weren't quite solid." I told her not to worry about it, that she'd hit her head and things would make more sense after she healed up. But I was already starting to wonder if maybe there was more to this than bad equipment and accidents. The next morning, I got a call from Mark Thompson. Mark was one of the best climbing guides in Tennessee, and he wanted to take a group down into the bottom of Savage Gulf. The technical stuff, ropes and harnesses, and lots of experience needed. Just a small group, he told me. 3 clients who know what they're doing. We'll be careful. I should have told him no. After what happened to Janet, I should have closed that whole section of the gorge until I could figure out what was going on. But Mark was good at his job. He'd never had an accident in 8 years of guiding. And I still thought Janet's fall was just bad luck and equipment failure. I told him to go ahead, but to radio me every hour. I never heard from Mark again. Mark's first radio check came in right on time at 9 in the morning. His voice was clear and cheerful. "Base, this is Mark. We're at the top of Devil's Staircase getting ready to rappel down. Weather's perfect. No wind. See you in a few hours." Devil's Staircase is the hardest way down into Savage Gulf. It's a series of cliff drops that go down almost 300 feet total. Only expert climbers should even think about trying it. But Mark knew every inch of those cliffs. His second check came in at 10 o'clock. But this time something was different in his voice. "Base, Mark here. We're about halfway down the second pitch, having some equipment issues. Nothing serious, just checking our gear more carefully." I asked him what kind of equipment issues. "Ropes keep getting twisted up," he said. "And Sarah's harness buckle came undone twice. We're being extra careful." That got my attention. Sarah Chen was one of Mark's clients, but she wasn't a beginner. She'd been climbing for 15 years and knew her gear inside and out. Harness buckles don't just come undone by themselves. "Mark, maybe you should head back up," I said into the radio. "Nah, we're good," he replied. "Just need to move slower." I should have insisted. I should have gone down there myself. The third radio check never came. At 11:15, I tried calling Mark. Nothing. At 11:30, I tried again. Still nothing. By noon, I was hiking toward Devil's Staircase with a full rescue pack and enough rope to get down to the bottom of the gorge if I had to. The fog was back. It had started forming while I was still in the parking lot, and by the time I reached the top of the cliffs, it was so thick I could barely see the edge. The temperature had dropped again, and that sweet, rotten smell was stronger. I called down into the gorge, hoping to hear Mark or one of his clients call back. The fog seemed to swallow my voice. Even the echo was wrong. Instead of bouncing back from the opposite cliff wall, my shouts seemed to get absorbed into nothing. I set up my rappel gear and started down Devil's Staircase. The first 100 feet went fine. The rock was solid, my ropes were good, and I could follow the route Mark would have taken. But as I got deeper into the gorge, things started feeling wrong. The fog was moving in ways that didn't make sense. Sometimes it would clear out completely, giving me a perfect view of the rocks below. Other times it would close in so thick I couldn't see my own hands. And it was cold. Not just cool like normal fog, but really cold, like winter air. Halfway down the second cliff section, I found Mark's first piece of gear. It was a carabiner, one of the metal clips climbers use to connect ropes to the rock. It was wedged into a crack about 20 feet to the right of the normal climbing route. When I got closer, I saw that it was bent almost in half. I've seen carabiners break under extreme loads, but I'd never seen one bent like this. It looked like someone had grabbed both ends and twisted them with their bare hands. A carabiner like that is made of aircraft aluminum. It takes thousands of pounds of force to break one. To bend it like this would take even more force, applied in exactly the right way. I kept going down. At the bottom of the second cliff, I found Sarah's helmet. It was sitting on a narrow ledge, upright, like someone had carefully placed it there. But Sarah should have been wearing that helmet. No experienced climber takes their helmet off while they're still on the cliff. I called out again. This time I heard something call back. It wasn't quite an echo. It sounded like my own voice, but different. Like someone was copying the words but didn't quite understand what they meant. The fog cleared for a moment and I could see down to the bottom of the gorge. There was something moving down there, something big and dark that didn't move like a person. It seemed to flow rather than walk, sliding between the trees and rocks like it was made of the same stuff as the fog. Then the fog closed in again, and I couldn't see anything. I was still 100 feet from the bottom when I found Mark. He was hanging from his rope about 30 feet below me, not moving. At first I thought he might just be resting, taking a break on the cliff face. But as I rappelled down toward him, I could see that something was very wrong. Mark was hanging upside down. His feet were tangled in the rope above him, and his head was pointing toward the ground. That's not how a climbing accident happens. When climbers fall, they fall feet first. The safety systems are designed to keep them upright. It was like something had grabbed him and flipped him around. I reached Mark's position and checked for a pulse. He was alive, but unconscious. His face was blue from hanging upside down, and he'd been there long enough that blood was pooling in his head. Getting him turned right side up was one of the hardest technical rescues I'd ever done. I had to set up a complicated pulley system while hanging from the cliff myself, all in fog so thick I could barely see what I was doing. While I worked, I kept hearing things. Sounds that might have been voices or might have been wind moving through the rocks. Sometimes it sounded like someone was calling my name, but when I looked around, there was nothing but fog. It took me almost an hour to get Mark stable and ready to haul up to the top. During that whole time, I didn't see or hear any sign of his other two clients. As I started pulling Mark up the cliff, the fog began to clear. That's when I saw them. Sarah and the third client, a guy named Pete, were at the bottom of the gorge. They weren't moving. From where I was, I couldn't tell if they were hurt or dead, but they were both lying in impossible pose. Itchins, like they'd fallen and landed in ways that bodies don't normally land. I got Mark up to the top of the cliff and called for another helicopter evacuation. While I waited, Mark started to wake up. "Daniel?" he said. His voice was weak and confused. "What happened to me?" "You had an accident," I told him. "You were hanging upside down from your rope." "That's not possible," he said. "I remember setting up the rappel. Everything was normal. Then..." He stopped talking and looked around. "Where are Sarah and Pete?" I told him they were still down in the gorge, and that I was going back for them as soon as the helicopter took him away. "No," Mark said, grabbing my arm. "Don't go back down there. Something's wrong with that place. Really wrong." "What do you mean?" "The fog," he said. "It's not just fog. There's something in it. Something that watches you." Mark's grip on my arm was tight, and his eyes were wide with fear. In 8 years of guiding climbers through dangerous places, I'd never seen him scared of anything. "I saw it," he whispered, "right before everything went black. A shadow, but not a shadow. It was tall, taller than any person, and it had eyes." The helicopter arrived before he could tell me any more. As they loaded Mark on the stretcher, he kept saying the same thing over and over. "Don't let anyone else go down there. Something lives in that gorge." After the helicopter left, I stood at the edge of the cliff and looked down into Savage Gulf. The fog was starting to clear, and I could see Sarah and Pete more clearly now. They weren't moving at all. I had to go get them. It was my job. But for the first time in 17 years as a ranger, I was really scared of what I might find down there. The sun was starting to get lower in the sky. In a few hours it would be dark. And I had the feeling that Savage Gulf was a very different place after the sun went down. I should have waited for backup. I should have called in a full search and rescue team with more equipment and more people. But Sarah and Pete had been down there for hours already, and if they were hurt, every minute counted. I rappelled back down Devil's Staircase as fast as I could safely manage. This time the fog stayed thin, and I could see all the way to the bottom of the gorge. The silence was complete. No bird calls, no insects, not even the sound of water that usually echoes off the cliff walls. Sarah was lying next to a pile of boulders about 50 yards from the base of the cliff. When I reached her, I could see she was breathing, but she was unconscious. Her climbing gear was scattered around her like it had been torn off and thrown aside. But it was the way she was lying that made my skin crawl. She was on her back with her arms spread wide, but her head was twisted around so far that she was looking straight down at the ground. No person can turn their head that far. It should have broken her neck. I checked her pulse and breathing. Both were steady, but slow. It was like she was in some kind of deep sleep. Pete was 20 yards away, and he was in even worse shape. He was sitting upright against a tree, but his legs were bent backward at the knees. Not broken, bent. Like someone had grabbed his ankles and folded his legs the wrong way at the joints. He was conscious, but when I talked to him, he didn't seem to see or hear me. His eyes were open, staring straight ahead, but they didn't track movement. When I waved my hand in front of his face, he didn't blink. "Pete," I said, "can you hear me? I'm here to help." He opened his mouth like he was going to answer, but no sound came out. Then his mouth kept opening wider and wider until his jaw was stretched so far that I could see all the way down his throat. That's when I heard the laughing. It started soft and low, like someone trying not to be heard. But it got louder and closer until it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. It didn't sound like human laughter, and it was too deep, and it went on too long without stopping for breath. I looked around the gorge, trying to see where the sound was coming from. The fog was starting to thicken again, but I could still make out the basic shapes of rocks and trees. That's when I saw the shadow. It was on the cliff wall about 100 feet away, but it wasn't the shadow of anything I could see. It was shaped like a person, but much taller and thinner than any real person could be, and it was moving independently of any light source. As I watched, the shadow peeled itself off the cliff face and began moving across the rocks toward me. It wasn't walking exactly. It flowed like liquid but kept its human shape. Where it passed over rocks and trees, they seemed to grow darker, like the shadow was sucking the light out of everything it touched. I grabbed Sarah under the arms and started dragging her toward the base of the cliff. If I could get my rescue rope set up, maybe I could haul both her and Pete up before whatever that thing was reached us. But Pete wasn't moving. When I tried to lift him, his body was limp and heavy, like he was made of wet sand, and his eyes were still wide open, staring at nothing. The shadow was getting closer. As it moved, I could see that it had features, or at least darker spots where features would be. 2 deep holes for eyes, and a gash across the lower part that might have been a mouth. "Pete, we have to go," I said, shaking his shoulders. "Right now." This time, he did respond. His head turned toward me, moving in slow, jerky motions like a broken puppet. When our eyes met, he smiled. It wasn't Pete's smile. It was too wide, and there were too many teeth. I let go of him and focused on Sarah. Getting one person up the cliff would be hard enough. I'd have to come back for Pete if I could. The shadow had stopped moving toward me. It was standing, floating, about 30 feet away, between me and the climbing route I'd used to get down. Up close, I could see it was at least 8 feet tall, with arms that reached almost to the ground. It tilted at its head to one side, like it was studying me. Then it raised one of those impossibly long arms and pointed at Sarah. "No," I said out loud. I don't know why I thought talking to it would help, but I couldn't think of anything else to do. "She's hurt. I'm taking her out of here." The shadow's mouth opened. Instead of the laughter I'd heard before, this time it spoke. Its voice was like the sound of rocks falling down a deep hole, deep and hollow, with echoes that seemed to come from inside my own head. "This place is not for the living," it said. "You do not belong here." "I'm a park ranger," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's my job to help people." "Your job," the shadow repeated. "Yes, you help them leave. You help them cross over." It took me a second to understand what it meant. Then I realized this thing thought I was there to help Sarah and Pete die. Like I was some kind of guide to take them from the world of the living to whatever came after. "That's not what I do," I said. The shadow tilted its head the other way. "No?" Then why do you bring them to the place of the dead? I thought about what the Cherokee had called this place, and I thought about all the climbing accidents I'd seen here over the years. More than any other part of the park. Way more than there should have been on cliffs that weren't really that dangerous. You've been killing people, I said. I guide them, the shadow said. As you do. We are the same. We're not the same. The shadow moved closer. When it did, the temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. You take them from the safety of their homes, it said. You bring them to the edge of the world. You give them ropes and tell them to trust the void. It was talking about rock climbing, but the way it described it made it sound like something else entirely. And when they fall, the shadow continued, you are that. You're to catch them, or to carry them away when the void claims them. You are a shepherd of the dead. I started dragging Sarah toward the cliff again. The shadow didn't try to stop me, but it followed alongside, staying just out of arm's reach. This one is already mine, it said, pointing at Sarah. She fell. She crossed over. You cannot take her back. She's alive, I said. She's breathing. Her body breathes, but look at her eyes. I looked down at Sarah's face. Her eyes were open, and they had the same empty stare as Pete's, like nobody was home inside. Where are they? I asked. Where did their minds go? To the place between places, the shadow said. To the space behind the world. They are safe there, peaceful. I thought about Janet Mills, lying on that ledge after her fall. She'd been conscious and alert, talking normally. Whatever this thing did to people, it hadn't worked on her. Janet Mills, I said. You tried to take her too, but she got away. The shadow stopped moving. For a long moment, it just stared at me with those dark holes where eyes should be. That one was difficult, it finally said. She did not want to cross over. She fought. What makes you think these two wanted to? They came to the place of the dead willingly, the shadow said. They brought ropes to help them fall. They wanted to leave the world of the living. It really believed that. This thing thought that people who came rock climbing in Savage Gulf were looking for a way to die. I reached the base of the cliff and started setting up my rope system to haul Sarah up. My hands were shaking from the cold, and I kept glancing over my shoulder to make sure the shadow wasn't getting closer. You cannot take her, the shadow said. She belongs to this place now. Watch me, I said. I got Sarah into a rescue harness and started hauling her up the cliff. The pulleys and ropes worked fine, but something was wrong with the physics. She felt much heavier than she should have, like she was being pulled down by more than just gravity. When I looked down, I saw why. The shut. A dhow had wrapped itself around Sarah's legs like a dark rope. It was holding her back, trying to keep her in the gorge. Let go of her, I yelled. I cannot, the shadow said. She is mine now, as he is mine. I looked back toward where Pete had been sitting against the tree. He was still there, but now he was standing up. His legs were still bent backward at the knees, but somehow he was walking anyway, moving toward us with a shuffling, broken gait. And he was still smiling, that terrible smile with too many teeth. I pulled harder on the rope, trying to drag Sarah up faster. The shadow's grip on her seemed to be weakening, but now Pete was only about 10 feet away. Help me, Pete said, but his voice was wrong, like it was coming from somewhere else and just using his mouth to make the sounds. Let me help you cross over, Pete said. It's peaceful here. No pain, no fear. His backward legs gave out and he collapsed, but instead of falling, he sank into the ground like it was made of water. A few seconds later, he popped up right next to where I was standing. I stumbled backward and almost fell off the narrow ledge I was standing on. Pete reached for me with arms that were suddenly too long, stretching out like rubber. Come with us, he said. You belong here too. You've always belonged here. That's when I finally understood what I was dealing with. This wasn't just some guardian spirit protecting a sacred place. This thing was a collector. It took people who came to Savage Gulf and added them to itself somehow, making them part of whatever it was. And it had been doing it for a long time. maybe centuries. I pulled out the knife I kept on my rescue belt and cut the shadow's dark grip on Sarah. It screamed when I did, a sound like metal tearing apart. Sarah suddenly felt normal weight again, and I was able to haul her up the cliff much faster. But Pete was climbing, G up after us, moving up the rock face like a spider. His bent legs didn't seem to slow him down at all. I reached the top of the cliff and pulled Sarah over the edge. She was still unconscious, but her breathing was getting stronger. Pete's head appeared over the cliff edge. He was still smiling. "You can't take her away from here," he said. "This is where she belongs now. This is where you all belong." I kicked him in the face as hard as I could. Instead of falling backward, his head just snapped to one side with a wet cracking sound. When he turned back toward me, his neck was twisted all the way around, but he was still smiling. "That hurt," he said cheerfully. "Do it again." I grabbed Sarah and ran toward my truck, leaving all my rescue gear behind. I could hear Pete climbing over the edge of the cliff behind me, and something else too. Something big moving through the trees, keeping pace with us. The shadow was following us up out of the gorge. By the time I reached the parking area, it was getting dark. I loaded Sarah into my truck and called for another helicopter evacuation on my radio. "This is Ranger Rockwell requesting immediate medical evacuation at Savage Gulf parking area," I said. "One unconscious climber, possible head injury." The dispatcher's voice crackled back through the radio. "Daniel, we show that you already called in 2 evacuations from that location today. What's your status?" I looked back toward the woods. I could see Pete standing at the edge of the tree line watching us, and behind him a dark shape that was too tall to be human. "My status is that Savage Gulf needs to be closed," I said. "Right now, nobody else comes down here." "Daniel, are you all right? You sound—" I turned off the radio and focused on Sarah. Her eyes were starting to move around like she might be waking up. The helicopter arrived 20 minutes later. As the paramedics loaded Sarah onto a stretcher, she grabbed my arm. "Did you get Pete?" she asked. I looked back toward the woods. Pete was still there, still watching, still smiling. "Yeah, I lied. I got him out too." Sarah squeezed my arm. "Thank you," she said. "I had the strangest dreams while I was down there. I dreamed I was flying." After the helicopter left, I sat in my truck and tried to figure out what to put in my incident report. How do you explain something like this to people who weren't there? I was still trying to come up with an answer when Pete walked out of the woods and tapped on my driver's side window. "You forgot someone," he said through the glass. His voice was muffled, but I could still hear him clearly. I started the truck and drove away as fast as I could. In my rearview mirror, I could see Pete standing in the middle of the road, waving goodbye. He was still there when I lost sight of him around the first curve. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Pete's twisted smile and those empty stares. I kept telling myself it was all some kind of hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. People don't bend their legs backward and walk around. Shadows don't talk to you. But I knew what I'd seen was real. The next morning, I drove to the Cherokee Nation Cultural Center in Chattanooga. If the Cherokee had called Savage Gulf the place of the dead, maybe someone there could tell me why. I found Mary Sequoia in the research library, working on a project about traditional Cherokee spiritual sites. She was a small, elderly woman with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see right through me. "You've been to Savage Gulf recently," she said before I even introduced myself. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "You have the smell of the shadow world on you," she said. "And you look like someone who has seen things he doesn't understand." I told her everything that had happened over the past 2 days. When I finished, Mary nodded like none of it surprised her. "The Cherokee have stories about that place. Going back hundreds of years," she said, "long before it became a state park. We called it Nvi Amayehi, the place where spirits cross over." "Cross over to where?" "To the Nightland," she said. "The realm of the dead and the unborn. In our tradition, certain places are thin spots where the two worlds touch. Savage Gulf is one of the thinnest." Mary led me to a table covered with old books and photocopied papers. She pulled out a hand-drawn map that looked like it was at least a century old. This was made by my great-grandfather, she said, pointing to markings on the map. He was a medicine man. These symbols show the sacred sites where the barrier between worlds is weak. I recognized the shape of Savage Gulf on the map. It was marked with a symbol that looked like a human figure with its arms raised. What does that symbol mean? It's the sign for a guardian of the crossing, Mary said. A spirit that helps souls move from this world to the next. But not all guardians are benevolent. She turned to a page in one of the books. It was written in Cherokee syllabary, but there was an English translation underneath. This is a story about the Shadow Walker of Envi Amayehi, she read. It says that long ago, a Cherokee warrior was guarding the crossing place when enemy raiders attacked his village. He chose to stay at his post instead of going to help his people. When he finally left the crossing place, he found his entire family dead. Mary looked up at me. The guilt and rage changed him. Instead of helping souls cross over peacefully, he began forcing them to cross, taking them before their time. The other Cherokee tried to stop him, but he had become something more than human. So this thing has been killing people for hundreds of years? Not killing, Mary said. That's the problem. The Shadow Walker doesn't kill people. It takes them to the space between the worlds and keeps them there. They're not alive, but they're not dead either. They're trapped. I thought about Pete, walking around with his legs bent backward. About Sarah's empty stare. How many people has it taken? No one knows, Mary said. But in Cherokee tradition, we have ceremonies to try to call lost souls back from the Nightland. The problem is, the Shadow Walker has grown stronger over the years. It's harder and harder to get people back once it takes them. There has to be a way to stop it. Mary was quiet for a long moment. There is, she finally said, but it's dangerous, and you probably won't survive it. She told me about a Cherokee ritual called the Soul Challenge. It was something medicine men used to do when they needed to enter the Nightland and bring someone back. The person doing the ritual has to go to the crossing place and challenge the guardian directly, Mary explained. If you win, you can demand the return of the souls it's taken. If you lose, I become one of its prisoners. Or worse, the Shadow Walker might decide you'd make a good replacement guardian. Then you'd be trapped there forever, taking other people just like it does. I asked Mary if she would help me perform the ritual. I can't, she said. I'm too old, and I'm not trained in the old ways like my great-grandfather was. But I can tell you what you need to do. She spent the next hour explaining the ceremony. It involved fasting, ritual purification, and specific words that had to be spoken in Cherokee. The most important part was that I had to go back to Savage Gulf at midnight and call the Shadow Walker by its true name. What is its true name? Atsila Sagonige, Mary said. Fire that consumes. But Daniel, you need to understand. Once you speak that name in the crossing place, there's no going back. The Shadow Walker will come for you whether you're ready or not. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I fasted like Mary had instructed, and I practiced pronouncing the Cherokee words she'd taught me. I also gathered some supplies I thought I might need: extra flashlights, rope, and my service pistol. I knew the gun probably wouldn't do any good against something like the Shadow Walker, but it made me feel better to have it. 11:30 that night, I drove back to Savage Gulf. The parking area was empty except for Pete. He was sitting on the hood of a car that wasn't there when I'd left that morning. Probably belonged to one of Mark's clients. He waved at me cheerfully as I got out of my truck. You came back, he said. I knew you would. His legs were still bent backward and his neck was still twisted around, but he seemed happy to see me. I came back for you and Sarah, I said. And anyone else that thing has taken. Pete laughed. You can't take us back, he said. We don't want to go back, it's better here. Pete, that's not really you talking. That thing is controlling you. No, Pete said, hopping down from the car. I'm more myself than I've ever been. I can see everything now. All the connections. All the patterns. Do you want to know what I see when I look at you? Not really. I see a man who's been bringing people to die for 17 years, Pete said. And I see someone who's finally ready to stop pretending he doesn't know what he's really doing. I walked away from him and headed toward the trail to Devil's Staircase. Pete followed behind me, talking the whole time. "You know how many people have died in this gorge since you've been working here?" he asked. 47. That's almost 3 people a year, and you've been here for every single one." I didn't want to listen to him, but I couldn't block. "My name is Patricia Kirkwood, and I've been a park ranger for 13 years now. People call me Patty, and I work in Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains at Shenandoah National Park. Before this job, I was in the Army, training dogs to find bombs and missing people. The mountains helped me heal after some bad times overseas. The quiet woods, the clean air, the simple work of keeping hikers safe. It all made sense to me. I've always been good with dogs. In the Army, they listened to me when they wouldn't listen to anyone else. Here at the park, I run the K9 unit. We have 4 German Shepherds who help us find lost campers and track down people who break park rules. These dogs trust me, and I trust them. They can smell things I can't, hear sounds that don't reach my ears, and sense danger before it shows itself. Hell Hollow is the strangest place in our park. It's an 8-mile trail system that winds through a deep valley about 18 miles from our main ranger station. The name comes from old stories. Locals say Confederate deserters hid there during the Civil War, and bad things happened to them. Most rangers avoid the place. It's hard to get to, and the trails are rough. The trees grow thick there, blocking out most of the sunlight even at noon. I never believed in ghost stories. After what I saw in Afghanistan, real horror that people do to each other, I figured scary stories were just ways to explain things we didn't understand yet. Bears leave big paw prints. Mountain lions scream like women in the night. Every weird thing has a simple answer if you look hard enough. That changed in August of 1979. We hadn't had rain for 6 weeks, and the whole forest felt like it was holding its breath. Every leaf was dry as paper, and you could smell smoke from the smallest campfire miles away. The air hung heavy and still, making even the toughest hikers move slow and drin. Extra water. On August 15th, we got a call that changed everything. 5 college students from Virginia Tech had been camping in Hell Hollow for 4 days, and nobody had seen them come out. Their families were worried sick. The kids were supposed to check in every day using the emergency phone at the trailhead, but they'd gone quiet after the first night. My supervisor, Chief Ranger Williams, assigned me to lead the search. "Take the dogs," he said. "If anyone can find them fast, it's you and your team." I felt good about it. Lost hikers were our specialty, and 5 people leave a trail even a rookie could follow. I loaded up my truck with water, first aid supplies, and radio equipment. The 4 search dogs, Rex, Bruno, Shep, and Lady, jumped into their transport cages like they always did, ready to work. The drive to Hell Hollow takes 45 minutes on winding mountain roads. The closer we got, the quieter my dogs became. Usually they'd be panting and whining, excited to get out and start searching. This time they just sat in their cages, staring out at the forest with their ears pinned back. When we reached the trailhead parking area, I found the students' cars right where they should be. 2 old station wagons with Virginia Tech stickers and camping gear strapped on top. Nothing looked wrong, no broken windows, no signs of trouble. I radioed back to headquarters that we'd arrived and started getting the dogs ready. That's when I first noticed something was off. Rex, my lead dog and the smartest animal I'd ever worked with, wouldn't get out of his cage. He pressed himself against the back corner and made a low, whining sound I'd never heard before. The others did the same thing. In 6 years of working together, I'd never seen them act scared of anything. I opened Rex's cage door and tried to coax him out with his favorite treats. He looked at me with the those dark brown eyes like he was trying to tell me something important. Finally, he stepped down from the truck, but he stayed close to my legs and kept looking back toward the trail. Entrance. The other dogs followed his lead, moving in a tight group instead of spreading out like they usually did. "What's wrong, boys?" I asked, scratching Rex behind the ears. His fur felt damp with sweat even though the morning was cool. "Just some lost campers. Easy day." I clipped on their tracking leads and pulled out the evidence bag, a t-shirt one of the missing students had left in his car. The dog sniffed it and immediately picked up the scent trail leading into Hell Hollow. But instead of pulling forward like hunting dogs should, they planted their feet and pulled back toward the truck. "Come on," I said, tugging gently on Rex's lead. "This is what we do." Rex took a few steps toward the trail, then stopped and made that whining sound again. All four dogs were now pressed against each other, hackles raised, staring down the dark path between the trees. I'd seen dogs react to bears this way, and mountain lions, but there was something different about this. They weren't just afraid. They were trying to protect me from something. I decided to trust them. In all my years of working with search dogs, they'd never been wrong about danger. If they thought Hell Hollow was unsafe, maybe we needed backup. I radioed the station and asked them to send another ranger to meet us. While we waited, I walked around the parking area looking for clues. The students' campsite registration showed they'd planned to hike the full 8-mile loop and camp at the designated spot 3 miles in. Nothing unusual there. Their cars were locked tight with no valuables visible inside. Everything looked normal except for my dogs, who wouldn't stop staring at that trail entrance like it was going to bite them. Ranger Tom Bradley arrived 30 minutes later. Tom was younger than me, maybe 25, with the kind of enthusiasm that made him volunteer for every tough assignment. He, too. Okay, one look at my dogs and laughed. "What's wrong with your pack, Patty? They look like they've seen a ghost." "I don't know," I said. "They picked up the scent trail but won't follow it. Something spooked them bad." Tom shrugged and shouldered his backpack. "Well, 5 kids are counting on us. Dogs or no dogs, we need to find them before this drought gets any worse. Weather Service is calling for lightning tonight." He was right, but I still felt uneasy as we started down the Hell Hollow trail. The dogs came with us, but stayed bunched up between Tom and me instead of ranging ahead to track. The forest felt wrong somehow. Too quiet, too still. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Just our footsteps on the dry leaves and the sound of our breathing. After about a mile, Rex suddenly stopped and growled. Not his warning bark or his playful rumble. A deep, serious sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. He was staring off into the trees to our left, body tense and ready to fight or run. "What is it, boy?" I followed his gaze but saw nothing except shadows and undergrowth. Tom stopped beside me and pulled out his binoculars. "Probably just a deer. These dogs are really worked up about something." That's when we smelled it. A thick, awful smell like rotten eggs mixed with something burning. It was so strong it made my eyes water. The dogs started whining and backing up, pulling their leads tight. "Dead animal," Tom said, covering his nose with his shirt. "Maybe a bear that died in this heat. That would explain why your dogs don't want to be here." It made sense, but the smell seemed to be moving with us instead of coming from one spot. Every time we thought we'd walked past it, there it was again, hanging in the air like invisible smoke. We found the students' campsite 2 hours later. The moment I saw it, my stomach dropped. Their tents were shredded, not torn by wind or weather, but ripped apart by something with claws. Sleeping bags and camping gear were scattered everywhere. A cooler lay on its side, contents spilled, out, and spoiled. But it was the marks in the dirt that really scared me. Paw prints, bigger than any dog I'd ever seen, pressed deep into the dry ground around the destroyed campsite. They were everywhere, dozens of them, like a whole pack had circled the tents before attacking. Tom knelt down beside one of the clearest prints. "Jesus, Patty, look at the size of this thing." The print was almost as long as his hand and twice as wide. 5 toe marks with claw scratches extending an inch beyond each toe. Whatever made it had to weigh at least 150 pounds, maybe more. "Mountain lion?" Tom asked, but he didn't sound convinced. I shook my head. "Wrong shape. Too wide, too many toes. This looks like a dog print, but no dog gets this big." My 4 search dogs were now pressed against my legs, trembling. Rex kept looking around the destroyed campsite like he expected something to jump out at us. I'd never seen him this scared. Not even during thunderstorms, or when we found that injured bear last spring. We called out for the missing students, shouting their names and listening for any response. Nothing came back except our own voices echoing off the valley walls. The forest stayed dead quiet, like even the trees were afraid to make noise. "We need to call this in," I told Tom. "5 people don't just disappear, and whatever did this to their campsite might still be around." But when I tried to use my radio, all I got was static. The battery was full, and the unit had worked fine at the parking area. But now, it just made crackling sounds. Tom's radio did the same thing. "Equipment failure?" he asked. "Both radios at the same time? That doesn't happen." We decided to follow the trail deeper into Hell Hollow, looking for any sign of where the students might have gone. Maybe they'd run when their campsite was attacked. Maybe they were hiding somewhere, hurt and red, waiting for help. The paw prints led away from the campsite in all directions, but most of them headed toward the heart of the valley where the old Civil War sites were marked on our maps. I'd never been back there. Hell Hollow was too remote and dangerous for regular patrols. But I knew the stories. Confederate deserters had hidden in these mountains, and Union soldiers had hunted them down. Some say they found a whole group of deserters and shot them right there in the valley. Others say the deserters were never found, that their ghosts still wander the hollow, looking for revenge. Standing in that destroyed campsite with my terrified dogs and those impossible paw prints all around us, those old stories didn't seem so crazy anymore. We followed the paw prints deeper into Hell Hollow, but every step felt like a mistake. The trees grew thicker and taller, blocking out so much sunlight that it felt like evening even though it was only noon. My dogs stayed right beside me, looking over their shoulders every few seconds like something was following us. The trail wound down into the valley, getting narrower and more overgrown. Old Civil War markers appeared every quarter mile, rusted metal signs that told about battles and troop movements from more than 100 years ago. Most were too faded to read, but I caught words like Confederate retreat and Union pursuit. "Look at this," Tom called from up ahead. He was standing beside a historical marker that looked newer than the others. The metal plate was green with age but still readable. Hell Hollow Executions, 1863. On this site, Union forces captured and executed 12 Confederate deserters who had been hiding in these mountains for 6 months. Local residents reported strange occurrences following the executions, including sightings of large black dogs guarding the burial site. "Black dogs," I muttered low, looking down at the massive paw prints we'd been following, just like in the old stories. Tom laughed, but it sounded forced. "Come on, Patty. You don't believe in ghost dogs, do you?" Before I could answer, Rex started barking. Not his normal bark, but a wild, panicked sound that echoed through the valley. He was staring into the trees about 50 yards ahead, his whole body rigid with fear. The other dogs joined in, creating such a racket that birds finally started flying out of the trees. That's when I saw them. At first, they looked like shadows moving between the tree trunks, but shadows don't have eyes, and these things had eyes that glowed red like hot coals. I counted them as they moved. 1, 2, 5, 8, 12 dark shapes, each one bigger than any dog had a right to be. They weren't running toward us or away from us. They were just there, watching us, like they were deciding what to do with the people who'd wandered into their territory. "Tom," I whispered, trying not to move too fast. "Do you see them?" He raised his binoculars and went very still. "What the hell are those things?" The creatures, I couldn't think of them as dogs anymore, started moving closer. They didn't make any sound, not even footsteps on the dry leaves. They flowed between the trees like black water, always staying just far enough away that we couldn't see them clearly. But those red eyes never blinked, never looked away from us. My dogs had stopped barking and were now pressed so close against my legs I could barely walk. Rex was making a low, constant whining sound like he was begging me to run. Every instinct I had was telling me the same thing. Get out of Hell Hollow now, before these things decided we were a threat. But we couldn't leave. 5 college students were somewhere in this valley, and if these creatures were real, then those kids were in terrible danger. "We need to get to higher ground," I told Tom. "Find a place where we can see what we're dealing with and radio for backup." We started climbing up the ridge that ran along the eastern side of the valley. The creatures followed us, staying parallel to our path but never getting close enough for a clear look. Every time I turned to check on them, I saw those red eyes glowing in the shadows, counting us, measuring us. Halfway up the ridge, we found something that made my blood run cold. A backpack, torn and bloody, hanging from a tree branch about 8 feet off the ground. The name tag said, Kevin Morrison, one of the missing students. Tom climbed up and got the pack down. Inside were normal college things, textbooks, a wallet, some snacks. But the pack itself was shredded just like the tents at the campsite. Long claw marks ran through the heavy canvas like it was made of paper. How did this get up so high? Tom asked. I didn't want to think about that. Whatever had torn up Kevin Morrison's backpack was strong enough to jump 8 feet straight up, or smart enough to climb trees. Either possibility scared me. The red eyes were still following us through the trees, but now they seemed closer. I could start to make out shapes, huge black bodies, pointed ears, teeth that looked too big and too white. They moved like wolves, but wolves don't have eyes that glow like fire, and they don't grow to the size of small horses. We reached the top of the ridge just as the sun started setting behind the mountains. From up there, we could see the whole valley spread out below us, miles of forest and hidden valleys where anything could be hiding. My radio still didn't work, but at least we had a good view of our surroundings. That's when Tom screamed. I spun around and saw one of the creatures standing right behind him, not 20 feet away. In the fading daylight, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was definitely shaped like a dog, but everything was wrong about it. Too big, too tall, with fur so black it seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting. Yet its eyes weren't just red, they were glowing like hot coals in a forge, casting actual light on the ground around its feet. And it was staring right at me. Tom was backing up slowly, his hands raised like he was surrendering to a wild animal. Easy, he whispered. Easy, boy. We're not here to hurt you. The creature tilted its head, almost like it was listening. Then it opened its mouth and let out a sound I'll never forget, part howl, part roar, and part something that no earthly animal should ever make. The sound echoed through the valley and came back to us from all directions. That's when I realized we were surrounded. They'd been herding us up the ridge like sheep, cutting off our escape routes one by one. Now 12 pairs of red eyes formed a circle around us in the growing darkness. My dogs were pressed against each other in the center of the circle, whimpering like puppies. The first creature took a step toward Tom. Its paw made no sound on the rocky ground, but I could see the muscles moving under its black fur. It was easily 6 feet long from nose to tail, with shoulders higher than my waist. Patty, Tom whispered, not taking his eyes off the creature. What do we do? I didn't know. These weren't normal animals. They didn't act like wild dogs or wolves. They were too smart, too organized, too deliberate. Like they were thinking, planning, deciding what to do with the humans who'd invaded their territory. Then I remembered something from the historical marker we'd read. 12 Confederate deserters executed in 1863. 12 black dogs guarding the burial site. 12 red eyes surrounding us now on the ridge above Hell Hollow. They're not just animals, I said quietly. They're guarding something. That's why they haven't attacked us yet. We're not at the right place. The lead creature turned its burning gaze on me, and I swear it nodded like it understood what I was saying. That's when the lightning started. The first lightning bolt lit up the whole valley like a camera flash, and in that split second of brightness, I could see them now. Creatures, clearly. They weren't solid. The light went right through them in places, like they were made of smoke and shadow held together by pure will. But their eyes, those burning red eyes, were real enough to light up the darkness around us. Thunder crashed overhead, and the smell of rain mixed with that awful rotten egg stench that followed the creatures everywhere. But no rain fell, just dry lightning that split the sky and made the forest below us look like a nightmare. We need to get down from this ridge, I shouted to Tom over the thunder. Lightning's going to hit up here. But the creatures had other plans. As soon as we tried to move toward the trail, they closed in, forming a tighter circle around us, not attacking, just guiding us. They wanted us to go somewhere specific, and it wasn't back to safety. The lead creature turned and started walking down the opposite side of the ridge toward the deepest part of Hell Hollow. The others stayed around us, making sure we followed. My dogs had no choice. They were too scared to do anything but stay close to me and hope I could protect them. As we descended into the valley's heart, the lightning got worse. Bolt after bolt split the sky, and each flash showed us more of the creatures moving through the trees around us. There weren't just 12 anymore. Dozens of red eyes glowed in the darkness, all moving in the same direction, all herding us towards something we couldn't see yet. The forest floor changed as we walked. The normal dirt and leaves gave way to bare, burned ground that looked like nothing had grown there for years. The trees became twisted and black, reaching up like skeletal hands. Even the air felt different, thicker, hotter, full of that sulfur smell that made breathing painful. Then we saw the clearing. It was perfectly round, maybe 50 yards across, with nothing growing in it except dead grass and scattered bones. At the center stood 12 wooden posts, old and weathered but still standing. The remains of ropes hung from each post, and the ground around them was stained, dark with something that wasn't mud. "The execution site," Tom whispered. The creatures formed a wide circle around the clearing but wouldn't enter it themselves. They just sat on their haunches like normal dogs, watching us with those glowing eyes, waiting to see what we'd do. I understood now. This was their territory, their sacred ground, the place where 12 men had died over 100 years ago, cursing their executioners and swearing revenge. The black dogs weren't just guardians. They were the spirits of those executed soldiers, bound to this place by their anger and pain. "The missing students," I said. "They're here somewhere." We found them behind the execution posts, huddled together in a depression that might have been the original mass grave. All 5 students, alive but barely conscious, like they'd been drugged or scared into shock. They were covered in scratches and dirt, but breathing. "Kevin? Sarah? Can you hear me?" I knelt beside the closest student, a young woman with blonde hair and torn clothes. Her eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something I couldn't see. "The dogs," she whispered. "They brought us here. Made us watch." "Watch what?" She pointed at the execution posts. "The hanging. Every night since we got here, we've watched them hang, over and over. The soldiers come at midnight and they hang them and they scream." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the thunderstorm. "Sarah, that happened over 100 years ago. You're safe now." But as I said it, another lightning bolt illuminated the clearing, and for just a moment, I could see them. Transparent figures in blue uniforms, standing around the execution posts, holding rifles and shouting orders in voices that came from very far away. And hanging from the posts, 12 men in gray rags, their necks broken, their eyes full of hatred that time couldn't heal. The vision lasted only a second, but it was enough. The students had been forced to witness the same execution every night for 4 days, living the last moments of those doomed soldiers over and over again. No wonder they were in shock. "We have to get them out of here," Tom said, but his voice shook. He'd seen the vision too. The creatures around the clearing started growling, a low, rumbling sound that came from all directions at once. The lead creature stood up, larger than ever in the lightning flashes, and took a step toward us. That's when I realized our mistake. We'd entered their sacred ground without permission. We were trespassers on consecrated earth, and the guardians weren't going to let us leave. The creature opened its mouth, showing teeth like broken glass, and let out that awful sound again. Part howl, part roar, part scream of rage. The others joined in, creating a wall of supernatural noise that drowned out even the thunder. They were going to kill us. Not just kill us. They were going to keep us here like they'd kept the students, forcing us to watch the execution night after night until we lost our minds. But I was still a soldier, even after all these years. And soldiers don't give up, even when facing impossible odds. "Tom!" I shouted over the howling. "Help me get the students up. We're going to run for it." "Run where? They're everywhere." "Back to the execution posts. If this is consecrated ground, maybe the spirits will protect us." It was a crazy idea based on nothing but desperation, but it was all we had. We grabbed the semi-conscious students and dragged them to the center of the clearing, right between the 12 posts where those Confederate soldiers had died. The creatures rushed forward, but stopped at the edge of the circle of posts like they'd hit an invisible wall. They paced back and forth, snarling and snapping, but couldn't cross the line where the execution had taken place. "It's working!" Tom yelled. But I could see in their glowing eyes that this was only a temporary reprieve. They were patient. They'd been guarding this place for over a century. They could wait a little longer. Another lightning bolt split the sky, and this time it didn't stop. It struck one of the dead trees at the edge of the clearing, then jumped to another, then another. In seconds, the whole forest around us was on fire. The drought had turned Hell Hollow into a tinderbox, and now the lightning was setting it off. Flames raced through the dry underbrush, surrounding the clearing with a wall of fire that grew higher and brighter with each passing second. But the creatures didn't run from the flames. They walked right through them like the fire wasn't even there, their black fur smoking but never burning. Now they had us trapped between the supernatural guardians and a forest fire that would kill us just as surely as their teeth and claws. Tom grabbed my arm. "Patty, we're going to die here." I looked at the creatures, at the fire, at the 5 unconscious students who were counting on us to save them. Then I looked at my 4 search dogs, still pressed together in terror, but trusting me to find a way out. That's when I remembered something from my military training. When facing an enemy you can't defeat, sometimes you have to try talking instead of fighting. I stepped forward, closer to the edge of the invisible barrier that held the creatures back. "You were soldiers," I said, loud enough to be heard over the fire and thunder. "You died fighting for something you believed in. I'm a soldier too. These students, my partner, my dogs, they're under my protection. Let us go, and we'll make sure people remember what happened here. We'll tell them about the 12 men who died defending their home." The lead creature tilted its head, listening. For a moment, the howling stopped. "You've been guarding this place for over a century," I continued. "Your duty is done. Let us honor your sacrifice by leaving Tartoid, his place in peace." The creature stared at me with those burning red eyes, and I thought I saw something change in them. The rage was still there, but also recognition. One soldier acknowledging another. Then it stepped back into the shadows, and the others followed. Within seconds, they were gone, leaving us alone in the burning forest. "Run!" I shouted. We carried the students through the burning forest, following the trail back toward the parking area while flames chased us through the trees. My dogs ran ahead, finally brave enough to lead the way out of Hell Hollow. The fire was spreading fast, but we had enough of a head start to make it to safety. The students recovered during the hike out, becoming more alert with each mile we put between ourselves and the execution site. By the time we reached the parking area, they were walking on their own, though they still jumped at every shadow and refused to talk about what they'd seen. Tom radioed for medical support and firefighting crews while I loaded everyone into the vehicles. The students needed counseling more than medical treatment, but they'd live. We'd all live, which was more than I'd expected an hour earlier. The Hell Hollow fire burned for 3 days, consuming over 2,000 acres of forest. When the smoke finally cleared, the whole valley looked like a moonscape. Nothing but charred stumps and ash. The historical markers were melted metal, and the execution site was buried under tons of fallen, burned trees. But I knew the creatures were still there, somewhere under all that ash and debris. Fire couldn't hurt things that were already dead. Chief Ranger Williams recommended that Hell Hollow be permanently closed to the public. Officially, it was due to fire damage and unstable terrain conditions. The real reason was buried in classified reports that nobody would ever read. The 5 students transfers, read to other schools, and never talked publicly about their 4 days in Hell Hollow. Tom Bradley put in for a transfer to a different park and was gone within a month. He never could explain what he'd seen that night, and eventually stopped trying. As for me, I developed a problem I never expected. I became afraid of dogs. Not just afraid, but terrified. Even my own search dogs, animals I'd worked with for years, made me break out in a cold sweat. Every time I looked into their eyes, I saw red flames staring back at me. I transferred to desk duty and spent my last 5 years with the Park Service pushing papers and training new rangers. I never went back into the field, never worked with search dogs again. My colleagues thought I was suffering from delayed stress from my military service, and I let them believe that. It was easier than trying to explain the truth. But I wasn't done with Hell Hollow, and it wasn't done with me. Over the years, I started collecting stories from other Civil War battlefields around Virginia. Gettysburg, Antietam, Bull Run, places where soldiers died angry and afraid, far from home. The stories were always similar. Large black dogs seen at night, glowing red eyes in the forest, inexplicable animal attacks on campers and hikers. Park rangers at these sites would mention the incidents in their reports, then transfer to other jobs within months. Always the same pattern. Good rangers, experienced outdoors people, suddenly afraid to work alone in the woods. I think the Hell Hollow creatures weren't unique. I think every place where soldiers died violently, especially places where they were executed or died feeling betrayed, has its own guardians now. Spirits bound by anger and duty, protecting ground that was consecrated with their blood. Most of the time, they leave people alone. Hikers and campers can visit Civil War sites safely as long as they show respect for what happened there. But disturb the wrong place, camp too close to a mass grave, treat sacred ground like a playground, and the guardians will remind you that some debts can never be paid. I'm retired now, living in a small town 50 miles from any Civil War battlefield. I don't keep dogs anymore, and I don't go camping. But sometimes, on hot August nights when thunderstorms roll through the mountains, I can still smell that sulfur stench on the wind. And sometimes, just before dawn, I see red eyes watching my house from the tree line. They haven't forgotten me. The guardians of Hell Hollow know I was there that night, know I saw their secret and lived to tell about it. They're patient. They've been waiting over a century already. They can wait a little longer. But I know they're coming for me eventually, and when they do, I'll be ready to face them like the soldier I've always been, even if I'm too old and scared to fight anymore. Some duties never end, even in death. The 12 Confederate soldiers taught me that, and someday, when my own duty is finally done, maybe I'll understand what they were really protecting in that cursed hollow. Until then, I'll keep telling this story to anyone who'll listen, not because I want to scare people, but because they need to know. When you visit places where brave people died, show them the respect they earned with their sacrifice. Because the dead remember everything, and some of them are still standing guard. My name is Rebecca Moorfield, and I need to tell you what happened on Grandfather Mountain in September 1977. I've been working as a ranger in the Blue Ridge Mountains for 14 years now. I monitor weather patterns and do high-altitude rescues. I have a degree in meteorology from NC State, and I've been struck by lightning twice and live to tell about it. The Cherokee folks call me a friend, and the old-timers in these parts trust my word. I'm telling you this so you'll believe what comes next, because what I saw up there changed everything I thought I knew about these mountains. I grew up in these hills. My grandmother was what people called a granny woman. She knew herbs and old ways and stories that made your skin crawl. She used to tell me about the witch lights that danced on Devil's Courthouse when the spirits were angry. I always figured it was just swamp gas or car headlights reflecting off the fog. Natural stuff with natural explanations. That's what I believed until September 15th, 1977. I was stationed at the weather monitoring post on Devil's Courthouse. That's the exposed granite peak at 5,720 feet. 8 miles from the nearest road, above the tree line where the wind never stops howling. My job was to track storm systems coming through the mountains and radio warnings to the towns below. The morning started normal enough. I checked all my instruments, barometric pressure, wind speed, temperature readings. Everything looked standard for mid-September. A cold front was moving in from Tennessee, but nothing unusual about that. Then around noon, my equipment started acting strange. The barometric pressure readings made no sense. The numbers kept jumping around like someone was shaking the instruments. But I checked everything twice. The gauges were working fine. According to my readings, we had pressure changes that shouldn't happen in nature. It Was like the atmosphere was having some kind of fit. I radioed down to base camp. "This is Rebecca at Devil's Courthouse. I'm getting weird readings up here. Can someone double-check the instruments?" "Copy, Rebecca. What kind of weird?" "Pressure drops that would make a hurricane look gentle, but the sky is clear. Wind readings are all over the place, too. Probably solar storm activity. We've had reports of radio interference all morning." That made sense. Solar storms could mess with electronic equipment. I made notes in my log and kept monitoring. But as the afternoon wore on, things got stranger. The fog started rolling in around 3 o'clock, but it wasn't moving like fog should. Normal fog follows the valleys and rolls with the wind. This stuff was moving uphill, against the breeze, forming shapes that looked almost planned out, like someone was drawing patterns in the air. I'd seen a lot of weather in my time. Mountain fog can do strange things, but this was different. This fog had purpose. My radio started crackling with static. Then I heard a voice come through. "Dispatch calling all units about a missing hiking party." 4 people from Asheville had been doing day hikes in the area. Their car was still at the trailhead, but they never came back. "Last known position was the Rough Ridge Trail heading toward Devil's Courthouse," the voice said. "If anyone has visual contact, please respond." I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the trails below. Nothing. Just that weird fog getting thicker, and my instruments going crazier by the hour. That's when I noticed my compass spinning. The needle wouldn't hold steady, just kept turning in slow circles like it was confused. I tapped it, thinking maybe the mechanism was stuck, but it kept spinning. I pulled out my backup compass. Same thing. Both needles turning like they were caught in some kind of magnetic whirlpool. "Okay," I said out loud to myself, "that's not solar storm activity." The temperature started dropping fast as evening came on, but it wasn't dropping evenly. I'd feel a cold spot, then step 2 feet away and it would be warm, like pockets of winter air were just sitting there waiting. By sunset, I couldn't raise anyone on the radio. Just static and the occasional burst of voices speaking languages I didn't recognize. Old languages that sounded familiar but wrong at the same time. I should have hiked down that night. Should have packed up my gear and headed for the road while I still could. But I had a job to do, and those missing hikers might need help finding their way back. So I stayed. As darkness fell over Devil's Courthouse, I saw the first light. The light appeared just after full dark, maybe 50 yards down the slope from my weather station. At first I thought it was a flashlight, one of the missing hikers trying to signal for help. I grabbed my own light and started heading toward it, calling out, "Hello, are you okay down there?" The light stopped moving, just hung there in the air about 4 feet off the ground, bright blue-white, like the hottest part of a flame. "I'm a park ranger," I shouted. "If you need help, stay where you are." The light started moving again, but not like a person walking. It floated, smooth and steady, weaving between the trees like it was dancing. No bobbing up and down, no beam casting shadows. Just this perfect sphere of light drifting through the forest. I followed it for about 10 minutes, my boots crunching on dry leaves, branches catching at my jacket. The light stayed just ahead of me, never getting closer, never moving too far away, like it wanted me to follow. Then it stopped at a clearing I'd never seen before, even though I'd hiked every trail on this mountain. The clearing was perfectly round, maybe 30 feet across. No grass grew there, just bare dirt in a perfect circle, and in the center, scattered around like someone had dropped them, were 4 backpacks. I recognized the gear immediately. Odern hiking packs, expensive stuff. The kind city folks buy when they want to try the outdoors. These had to belong to the missing party from Asheville. The light hovered right over the packs, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. I approached carefully, my hand on the radio even though I knew it wasn't working. The backpacks were arranged in a neat square like someone had placed them there on purpose. No signs of struggle, no torn fabric or scattered contents. Just 4 packs sitting in the dirt like their owners had simply vanished. I knelt down and opened the nearest pack. Inside was a camera, one of those new Polaroid models. The film counter showed 12 pictures taken. I pulled out the photos. The first few were normal hiking shots. 4 people, 2 men, 2 women, all in their 20s, posing on overlooks, smiling at waterfalls, the usual tourist stuff. But as I flipped through the pictures, they got stranger. Photo 8 showed all 4 hikers standing in this same clearing, but they weren't looking at the camera. They were all staring up at the sky with blank expressions on their faces. Photo 9 was just the clearing, empty except for small lights floating in the background. Dozens of them, like fireflies but too bright and too big. Photo 10 made my blood run cold. The hikers were there again, but they looked wrong. Older somehow, like they'd aged years in the space of a few pictures. Their hair was gray, their faces wrinkled, their bodies bent like they were carrying invisible weights. The last 2 photos were just darkness and strange shapes I couldn't make out. I looked up from the pictures and realized the light was gone. The clearing was dark except for my flashlight beam, but I could feel something watching me from the trees. Not one thing, but several. Moving quietly through the forest, staying just out of sight. I gathered up the backpacks and saways. Started heading back toward my station, moving as fast as I could without running. The weight of 4 packs slowed me down, but I wasn't about to leave evidence behind. That's when I heard the voices. They came from everywhere at once. Not sounds carried on the wind, but voices right inside the forest around me. Speaking in that same old language I'd heard on the radio, but clearer now. Rhythmic and musical, like a chant or a prayer. The voices followed me all the way back to the weather station. Sometimes they sounded far away, sometimes close enough to be right behind me. But every time I spun around with my flashlight, I saw nothing but trees and shadows. Back at the station, I set the backpacks down and tried the radio again. Still nothing but static. I was completely cut off from the outside world, alone on a mountain with whatever had taken 4 people and left their gear behind. I should have been terrified. Any sensible person would have been. But alongside the fear, I felt something else, a strange familiarity, like I'd been in this situation before. Like some part of me had been waiting for this my whole life. Maybe it was my grandmother's blood. Maybe it was 14 years in these mountains. But I knew I was dealing with something that had been here long before the first white settler, long before the Cherokee themselves, something that considered this mountain its home and didn't appreciate visitors. I loaded my shotgun, standard equipment for Park Service in case of bears or wild dogs, and settled in to wait for dawn. The voices kept singing outside, growing louder as the night got deeper. Around midnight, the lights came back. Not one this time, but dozens. They rose up from the forest like bubbles in water, floating higher and higher until they surrounded my weather station. Beautiful blue-white spheres, each one about the size of a basketball, pulsing in perfect rhythm. They didn't come close enough to touch, but I could feel their presence like heat from a fire. The air around them hummed with energy that made my skin tingle and my teeth ache. I stepped out onto the deck of my station, shotgun in hand, and tried to look brave. "What do you want?" I called out. The lights pulsed faster, and the humming got louder. One of them drifted closer, and I got a better look at what I was dealing with. It wasn't just light. There was something inside each sphere, like smoke or mist swirling in patterns too complex to follow. And in the center, barely visible, shapes that might have been faces. Old faces, wrinkled and wise and angry. The closest light stopped about 10 feet away and hung there, waiting. I could feel it studying me, taking my measure. Then, without warning, it rushed forward. I fired the shotgun. The blast tore right through the light without slowing it down. The sphere hit me like a wall of ice water, and suddenly I was somewhere else. I was standing in the same clearing where I'd found the backpacks, but it wasn't empty now. The 4 missing hikers were there, standing in a circle, holding hands. But they weren't the young people from the photographs anymore. They were ancient. Their faces were like dried leather, their hair white as snow, their bodies bent and frail. They turned to look at me with eyes that held decades of confusion and fear. "Help us," one of them whispered, and her voice sounded like autumn leaves scraping across stone. "We can't remember. How long have we been here?" 3 days, I said. But even as I spoke, I knew it wasn't true. These people had been here much longer than 3 days. Time worked differently in this place. "We came to hike," another one said, a man whose face was so wrinkled I could barely make out his features. "Just for the day. We were going to be back by sunset. The lights appeared around us then, dozens of them, forming a perfect circle. They pulsed and sang, and with each pulse, the hikers grew a little older, a little weaker. They're feeding, I realized out loud. They're taking your life force. The lights heard me and responded. The singing got louder, more urgent, and I felt something tugging at my own energy, like invisible hands reaching inside my chest, trying to pull out something vital. I fought back, remembering my grandmother's stories. Old protections, old ways of dealing with spirits that had forgotten their proper place. Iron, I whispered, pulling out my utility knife. The blade was good steel, and the lights backed away from it like it was on fire. Salt, I said, dumping a packet from my emergency rations on the ground in a rough circle around the hikers. The salt hit the dirt and started glowing with a faint white light of its own. The spirit lights hissed, an angry sound like steam escaping from a kettle. They pressed closer but couldn't cross the salt line. Cherokee words, I said, trying to remember the phrases my grandmother had taught me. Protective words, binding words, words that commanded respect from the old powers. Tanawa, I called out. I speak to the Tanawa spirits. These people are under my protection. The lights stopped pulsing. The singing died away. For a moment, the clearing was completely silent. Then they rushed us all at once. I woke up back at my weather station, lying on the deck with the taste of blood in my mouth. The shotgun was beside me, empty shells scattered around. Morning was breaking over the mountains and everything looked normal, except for the 4 bodies. They were arranged in a neat row beside my station, the missing hikers, looking exactly like their driver's license photos. Young, healthy, peaceful, like they'd just laid down to take a nap. But when I checked for pulses, their skin was cold as winter stone. They'd been dead for hours, maybe days, and there wasn't a mark on them. I tried the radio again. This time it worked. Base camp, this is Rebecca at Devil's Courthouse. I found the missing hikers. Rebecca, thank God. We've been trying to reach you all night. Are they okay? I looked at the 4 bodies. So young, and still. They're going to need the coroner, not the rescue team. What happened? I started to answer, then stopped. How do you explain supernatural murder to a dispatcher? How do you tell them that spirits drained 4 people to death? Heart failure, I said finally. All 4 of them. Might be something environmental up here. Bad air, altitude sickness. You better send a hazmat team along with the coroner. Copy that. Helicopter will be there in an hour. I spent that hour trying to make sense of what had happened. The backpacks were gone. I'd left them right where the bodies were now, but they'd vanished completely. My instruments were working normally again. The fog had cleared, and the compass needles were pointing straight north like they should. Everything was back to normal, except for 4 dead people and the memory of lights that hunted human souls. The rescue helicopter arrived right on schedule. The pilot was a guy named Jim who'd worked with me on a dozen mountain rescues. Professional, efficient, no nonsense. Hell of a thing, he said, looking at the bodies. 4 healthy young people just dropping dead. You see anything unusual? Strange weather patterns, I said. Electromagnetic interference. Could have affected their heart rhythms. Jim nodded like that made sense. The coroner's team loaded the bodies into the helicopter and flew them down to Asheville for autopsy. The official report would say cardiac arrest, cause unknown, case closed. But I knew better, and I knew the lights weren't done with me. They came back the next night. This time I was ready. I'd driven down to the Cherokee Reservation and talked to Joseph Walkingstick, an elder who knew the old stories better than anyone. Witch lights, he said when I described what I'd seen. Not Cherokee spirits, something older. They were here before we were, sleeping in the deep places of the mountain. White man's roads and buildings woke them up, made them angry. How do you fight them? You don't fight them. You make them remember what they used to be. They were guardians, once protectors of sacred places. But anger twisted them, made them hungry for life instead of defending it. He gave me a pouch of special tobacco, some white sage, and a piece of black flint carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Burn the tobacco and sage together, he said. Hold the flint stone and speak to them with respect. Remind them of their true purpose. If they listen, they might let you live. I drove back up to Devil's Courthouse that evening with Joseph's gifts and a heart full of doubt. The sun was setting behind the peaks, painting the sky the color of old blood. The lights were waiting for me. They rose up from the forest as soon as I parked at the weather station. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, more than I'd ever seen before. They surrounded the building, pulsing and singing, calling to something deep in my bones. I stepped out onto the deck with the tobacco and sage in one hand, the flint stone in the other. "I know what you are," I said to the lights. "I know what you used to be." They pressed closer, and I felt that familiar tugging at my life force. But this time I didn't fight it. I let them feel my memories, my grandmother's stories, my years in these mountains, my love for the wild places that were disappearing under concrete and steel. "You were guardians," I said, "protectors of the sacred peaks. The Cherokee honored you, left offerings, asked permission before entering your territory." The lights pulsed, and I felt their attention focus on me completely. "But now you're just killers. You've forgotten your purpose. You take life instead of protecting it." The singing stopped. The lights hung motionless in the air, waiting. I lit the tobacco and sage, and sweet smoke filled the night air. The scent seemed to calm the spirits. Their glow grew softer, less aggressive. "Remember," I said, holding up the flint stone. The carved symbols call at the light and seemed to glow with their own power. "Remember what you were meant to be." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the lights began to fade, not disappearing, transforming. The angry blue-white glow softened to warm gold, then to gentle silver. The shapes inside the spheres became clearer, and I saw them for what they really were. Faces. Ancient faces, wise and sorrowful. Spirits who had watched over these mountains for thousands of years, who had been corrupted by decades of disrespect and violation of sacred places. They were remembering themselves. But not all of them wanted to remember. 3 of the lights refused to transform. They stayed bright and angry, pulsing with that hungry blue-white fire. And I realized these 3 were different from the others. Younger spirits, ones that had been born from anger instead of being corrupted by it. These were the ones that had killed the hikers. These were the ones that wanted to kill me. They rushed forward together, moving faster than thought. I raised the flint stone and shouted the Cherokee words Joseph had taught me. Binding words, words of command. The stone flared with black light, and the attacking spirits slammed into an invisible barrier just inches from my face. But the barrier wouldn't hold for long. I could feel it cracking under their assault. "You have a choice," I said to the 3 angry lights. "Transform like your elders, or face the consequences of murder." They responded by attacking harder. The barrier shattered, and ice-cold energy poured over me like a waterfall. This time I didn't try to fight the vision. I let it take me. I was standing on Devil's Courthouse, but it was different. Older. The trees were bigger, the air cleaner, the whole mountain alive with a presence I could almost touch. This was how it had been before the first road, before the first clear-cut, and before the sacred places were turned into tourist attractions. Cherokee people moved through the forest below, hunting and gathering, living as partners with the mountain instead of conquerors. They left offerings at special places, asked permission before taking anything, treated the spirits as family. The guardian lights were everywhere then, dozens of them, watching over every stream and grove and peak. They were beautiful, gentle, protective. They helped lost travelers find their way home and warned of dangerous storms. But then the vision shifted, and I saw the changes. Roads carved through sacred groves, hotels built on ancient burial sites, forests cleared for parking lots and gift shops. The Cherokee driven away or confined to small reservations. The mountain treated like a commodity instead of a living spirit. The guardian lights tried to protect their territory at first. They appeared to surveyors and construction crews, trying to warn them away. But the warnings were ignored, dismissed as superstition or folklore. So the lights grew angry. And anger fed on itself, year after year, decade after decade, until the protectors became predators. The vision faded, and I was back on the deck of my weather station with 3 furious spirits trying to drain my life away. I could feel my energy flowing out of me like water from a broken tank. My hair was turning gray, my skin wrinkling, my bones growing brittle. In minutes, I would be as old and empty as those 4 hikers. But I had one advantage they hadn't. I knew what was happening to me. "I understand your anger," I said to the lights, my voice already sounding older, weaker. "I've seen what was done to your mountain, but killing innocent people won't fix anything." The lights pulsed, and I felt a response. Not words, but emotions. Rage and sorrow and desperate loneliness. They had been guardians for so long that they didn't know how to be anything else, but everything they were supposed to guard was gone or changed. "There's another way," I said. "Help me protect what's left. Work with Piyun, Opal, instead of against them. Teach them to respect the mountain again." One of the 3 lights hesitated. Its glow flickered between angry blue and gentle gold. "Show them the old ways," I continued, even as more of my life force flowed away. "Guide the ones who come seeking the sacred places. Warn away the ones who come to exploit them." The hesitant light made its choice. It transformed, joining the older spirits in their peaceful vigil. That left 2. These last 2 were pure predators now, spirits born from decades of rage with no memory of their original purpose. They couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be transformed. They could only be stopped. I pulled out my utility knife again and cut my palm, letting blood drip onto the flint stone. The Cherokee symbols blazed with light, and I spoke the binding words with all the strength I had left. "By blood and stone and sacred fire, I bind you to this place. No more shall you hunt the innocent. No more shall you feed on fear. Return to the deep places of the mountain and sleep until you remember wisdom." The binding took hold. The 2 predator spirits fought against it, their light flaring brighter than ever, but they couldn't break free. Slowly, inevitably, they sank toward the earth, drawn down into the mountain's depths, where they would sleep until their anger cooled. The last thing I saw before I collapsed was the peaceful spirits, dozens of them, surrounding me with warm, golden light, protecting me as I had protected them. I felt my life force slowly return. Not all of it, not enough to undo the aging I'd suffered, but enough to survive. When I woke up, the sun was rising over a quiet mountain. The spirits were gone, back to their eternal watch. But I knew they were still there, still protecting the sacred places from those who would harm them, and I knew my life had changed forever. The official report said I suffered from altitude sickness and exposure during my overnight stay at the weather station. The 4 hikers had died of cardiac arrest brought on by the stress of being lost in unfamiliar terrain. The electromagnetic anomalies were attributed to unusual solar activity. Case closed, everyone satisfied with rational explanations. But I knew the truth, and the mountain knew I knew. I requested a transfer from Devil's Courthouse the next month. The Weather Service was happy to move me to a lower elevation. They said the high altitude was clearly affecting my health. My hair had gone half gray overnight. I'd lost 15 pounds that never came back, and I tired more easily than I used to. But I also developed new abilities. I could sense supernatural presences anywhere in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I could tell when spirits were angry or peaceful, when a place was sacred or just empty wilderness. I could see the lights, even in daylight, watching from the deep forest, keeping their ancient vigil. Most importantly, I could communicate with them, not in words, but in the old way, through respect and offerings and careful attention to the signs they gave. I became a go-between. When hikers reported strange lights or unexplained phenomena, I was the ranger they called. I'd go to those places and talk to the spirits, find out what was wrong, negotiate solutions that kept both sides safe. Sometimes it was just a matter of rerouting a trail away from a sacred grove. Sometimes I had to convince developers to change their plans. Sometimes I just had to explain to the spirits that the world had changed, and not all change was an attack. It worked mostly. The number of unexplained deaths and disappearances in the Blue Ridge dropped to almost zero in the years after Devil's Courthouse. Word spread quietly through the ranger service. If you've got a supernatural problem, call Rebecca Moorfield. She knows how to handle it. But other places started reporting similar incidents. The Great Smoky Mountains, the Shenandoah, Mount Mitchell. It seemed like guardian spirits all through the Appalachians were waking up, remembering their purpose, choosing sides between protection and predation. I do what I can. I travel to the worst incidents, carry my grandmother's wisdom and Joseph Walking Stick's teachings to spirits who have forgotten their true nature. Sometimes I succeed, sometimes I fail, but I keep trying, because I learned something important on Devil's Courthouse that September night in 1977. The supernatural world isn't separate from our world, it's part of it, woven through it like roots through soil. We can pretend it doesn't exist, dismiss it as folklore and superstition, but that just makes it angry. Better to acknowledge it, better to show respect, better to remember that we're not the only intelligences sharing this planet. The Cherokee knew that, my grandmother knew that, now I know it too. So if you're ever hiking in the Blue Ridge Mountains and you see lights that don't behave like they should, lights that dance between the trees or follow you on the trail, don't run. Stop where you are, show respect, and listen to what they're trying to tell you. They might be warning you away from a dangerous place. They might be guiding you toward something sacred, or they might just want acknowledgement that they exist, that they have a right to be here too. Whatever you do, don't ignore them. Don't dismiss them as tricks of the light or overactive imagination. The spirits of the mountains are real. They're watching. And after decades of being forgotten, they're finally ready to be remembered. Just make sure you remember them with respect. Because the alternative is what happened to those 4 hikers from Asheville. And trust me, you don't want that to be your story. My name is Rebecca Moorfield, and I've been a bridge between worlds for almost 50 years now. I'm getting old, and someday I won't be able to do this work anymore. When that day comes, I hope someone else will take up the responsibility. Someone who understands that the mountains are alive, that they have guardians, and that those guardians are willing to work with us if we're willing to work with them. Until then, I keep making my rounds, checking on the sacred places, talking to the spirits, making sure the peace holds. Because some truths are too important to let die with the people who learned them, and some lights are meant to guide us home, not lead us astray. Remember that. Next time you see something impossible dancing in the darkness between the trees. My name is Michael Sutherland, and I've been a forest ranger in West Virginia coal country for 21 years. I've sealed 156 abandoned mines, pulled bodies from cave-ins, and walked through places most folks wouldn't go in broad daylight. I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. See, I grew up in these hills. My daddy worked the mines, just like his daddy before him. Lost my father to a roof collapse when I was 12. 37 men went down that day, but only 6 came back up. That's when I decided I'd spend my life making these old mines safe, so no other kid would lose their dad the way I did. People around here tell stories about the Wendigo, some old Native American legend about cannibals turning into monsters. Always figured it was just talk, something to scare kids away from wandering too far into the woods. Hell, I'd heard every ghost story, every local legend, every tale about things that go bump in the night. After 2 decades of walking through places where men died screaming, I thought I knew the difference between real danger and campfire stories. Coalwood Hollow sits about 35 miles northeast of my station, deep in the Monongahela National Forest. Used to be a thriving mining town back in the day, maybe 300 folks living in those little company houses, all of them depending on the mines for their bread and butter. Then came 1965. Cave-in trapped 31 miners in the deepest shaft. Took the rescue teams 4 days to reach them, but by then it was too late. They never did recover all the bodies. The shaft was too unstable, too dangerous. Companies sealed it up with concrete and steel, marked it off limits, and that was that. The town died slow after that. families moving away one by one until the state finally evacuated what was left in 1979. I'd been through Coalwood plenty of times over. Or the years, checking the old mine seals, making sure nobody was trying to get inside. Standard procedure. The concrete barriers were solid, the warning signs still posted. Nothing but empty houses with broken windows and doors hanging off their hinges. That was before February 1985. The cold snap hit us harder than anything in recorded history. Temperatures dropped to 20 below zero and stayed there for weeks. The kind of cold that freezes your spit before it hits the ground, that makes your breath feel like glass in your lungs. That's when I got the call about the environmental survey team. Dr. Sarah Chen and her 3-person crew had been doing water table measurements around the old mining sites, checking for contamination. They'd radioed in their position 6 days earlier, said they were setting up base camp in Coalwood to ride out the storm. Should have been back in contact within 48 hours. Nothing. Their families were getting worried. The state police were snowed in. That left me. I loaded up my truck with emergency gear, extra food, medical supplies, and enough fuel to run the heater for 3 days if I got stuck. The drive up to Coalwood usually took about an hour, but the roads were buried under 4 feet of snow. Took me 6 hours of careful driving using chains and 4-wheel drive the whole way. The town looked different in all that snow. Peaceful, almost. Like somebody had thrown a clean white blanket over all the decay and abandonment. The old company houses stood in neat rows, their roofs heavy with snow, their windows dark as dead eyes. I found the survey team's vehicles parked near the old mining office, 2 trucks and a van, all covered in ice. Good sign, I thought. Meant they'd made it to shelter before the worst of the storm hit. Started checking the houses one by one, calling out their names. Dr. Chen, Sarah, anybody in there? The wind was howling through the empty buildings, making sounds like voices calling back. But when I stopped and listened real careful, there was nothing but silence and cold. Found their equipment. In the 3rd house I checked. Computers, measuring devices, sample containers, all of it just sitting there on a table like they'd stepped out for a minute and never came back. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The metal housing on one of their instruments had bite marks in it. Deep gouges where something had clamped down and tried to chew through solid aluminum. I ran my finger along the marks, feeling the sharp edges where teeth had scraped against metal. No animal I knew of could make marks like that. I spent the rest of that day searching every building in Coalwood, calling out until my voice was raw. The survey team was nowhere to be found, but I kept finding their stuff scattered around. A jacket here, a clipboard there, like they'd been moving from house to house and dropping things along the way. The weird thing was the tracks. Should have been footprints everywhere, right? 4 people moving around a small town for almost a week. But the only tracks I could find were leading toward the old mine entrance, and they were wrong somehow. Started out normal enough. Boot prints in the snow, heading from the houses toward the mining site. But as I followed them, they got stranger. The prints got longer, deeper. Like whoever was making them was stretching out their legs with each step, taking bigger and bigger strides. By the time I reached the mine entrance, the prints were 8 feet apart. No human being could walk like that. The mine shaft was sealed up tight, just like it had been for the past 20 years. Concrete barrier, steel reinforcement, warning signs in 3 languages. But something had been digging around the edges, clawing at the concrete with enough force to leave deep scratches in the stone. That's when I found Dr. Chen's notebook. It was lying in the snow about 10 feet from the mine entrance, the pages fluttering in the wind alley. Ike, a wounded bird. I picked it up and started reading. And what I found there made me wish I'd never come to Coalwood. Day 1. Set up base camp in mining office. Temperature dropping fast, but we should be able to ride out the storm. Jim found some interesting mineral samples near the old shaft entrance. Day 2. Storm getting worse. Can't get radio signal out. Must be the mountains blocking us. Feeling restless. Hungry all the time, even right after eating. Jim says the cold burns calories faster. Day 3. Something's wrong with us. Can't stop thinking about food. Even after finishing all our rations, still feel empty inside. Like there's a hole in my stomach that keeps getting bigger. Lisa suggested we check the old company houses for canned goods. Day 4. Found some old canned meat in one of the houses. Must have been there for years, but we ate it anyway. Tasted wrong. But the hunger was so bad we didn't care. Jim and Lisa are talking about hiking out, but I don't think any of us are strong enough. Day 5. The hunger is getting worse. It's not just in our stomachs anymore. It's in our heads, our bones, our souls. We're changing, becoming something else, something that needs to feed. I can hear scratching sounds coming from the old mine shaft, like something trying to get out. Or maybe it's us trying to get in. The last entry was just one line, written in shaky handwriting. Day 6. The mine is calling to us. I closed the notebook and looked back at the sealed mine entrance. The concrete looked solid enough, but now I could hear what Dr. Chen had written about. A faint scratching sound coming from somewhere deep underground. Except that was impossible. The mine had been sealed for 20 years. Nothing could be alive down there. I was about to head back to my truck when I heard the scream. It started low, like wind moaning through a crack in the rocks. Then it'd go, up higher, louder, until it was a shriek that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound went right through me, made my teeth ache and my bones feel cold. When it stopped, the silence was even worse. I looked around, trying to figure out where the sound had come from. The mine entrance, one of the houses, the forest beyond the town. That's when I saw them. 4 shapes moving through the trees at the edge of town. They were too far away to make out clearly, but they were walking wrong, taking those same long, impossible strides I'd seen in the tracks. Moving fast, but not quite running, more like they were floating just above the snow. "Sarah!" I called out. "Dr. Chen!" The shapes stopped. 4 pairs of eyes turned toward me, reflecting light like an animal's eyes in the dark. Then they started moving again, heading straight for me. I ran, made it back to my truck and locked the doors, hands shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine turned over on the 3rd try, and I gunned it out of there, fishtailing in the snow as I headed for the main road. But as I drove away, I could see them in my rearview mirror. 4 tall figures standing in the middle of the road, watching me go. They didn't look human anymore. I should have kept driving, should have gone straight back to my station and called for backup. But I couldn't get Dr. Chen's notebook out of my head. Couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened to those people. So I stopped at the ranger station about 10 miles down the mountain and called State Police Corporal Lisa Manning. We'd worked together before on missing persons cases, and I trusted her to keep an open mind about weird situations. "Mike, you sound scared," she said after I'd told her what I'd found. "That's not like you." "I am scared, Lisa. Something bad happened up there, something that doesn't make sense." She agreed to meet me at the station, and we drove back to Coalwood together in her cruiser. By then it was getting dark, and the temperature was dropping even more. "You really think they're still alive?" Annalisa asked as we pulled into town. I looked at the mine entrance where 4 sets of those impossible tracks led right up to the concrete barrier, and then disappeared. "I think something's alive up here," I said, "but I'm not sure it's them anymore." Lisa Manning was tough as nails. Had to be, working state police in rural West Virginia. But when she saw those tracks leading to the mine entrance, I watched her face go pale. "Those aren't human footprints," she said, kneeling down to get a closer look. "No way a person could make strides that long." "That's what I tried to tell myself," I said. "But I saw them, Lisa, 4 shapes moving through the trees like they were floating." She stood up and brushed snow off her knees. "Let's check the houses again. Maybe they're holed up somewhere, sick or hurt." We split up to cover more ground. I took the north side of town while Lisa checked the south. Each house was the same, empty, cold, filled with shadows and the sound of wind whistling through broken boards. I was coming out of the old barber shop when I heard Lisa scream. Not a surprised yell or a call for help, a full-throated, terror-filled scream that cut through the night air like a knife. I ran toward the sound, my boots slipping on the icy ground, my heart pounding against my ribs. Found her standing in front of the old church, her flashlight beam shaking as she pointed at something in the snow. It was a human arm, just lying there, torn off at the shoulder, the bone showing white against the red meat. The fingers were still wearing a wedding ring, a simple gold band that caught the light from our flashlights. "Dr. Chen," Lisa whispered. She was married." I knelt down next to the arm, trying not to look too close at where it had been ripped away from the body. The wound wasn't clean like a knife cut or jagged like an accident. It looked like something had grabbed hold and twisted until the joint gave way. "Where's the rest of her?" Lisa asked. That's when we heard the laughter. It came from somewhere behind the church, high and wild and completely wrong. Not human laughter, more like the sound a coyote makes when it's found something dead and rotten to eat. But mixed in with that animal sound were voices, words we could almost understand. "Hungry," one of them said. "So hungry." "More," said another. "Need more." Lisa had her gun out, hands steady despite what we'd just found. "Police, come out with your hands visible." The laughter got louder, and then we saw them. 3 shapes came around the corner of the church, moving in that same wrong way I'd seen earlier. They might have been human once, but not anymore. They were tall, maybe 8 feet, and so thin they looked like scarecrows made of bones and rags. Their skin was gray-white, stretched tight over their skulls, and their eyes glowed yellow in the dark. But the worst part was their mouths. Lipless grins full of teeth that were too long, too sharp, like somebody had filed them to points. And when they smiled at us, I could see bits of red meat stuck between the yellowed enamel. "Jim Morrison," one of them said in a voice like gravel and wind. That was his name, the one who tasted the best. Lisa fired 3 shots, center mass, perfect grouping. The bullets went right through the things like they were made of smoke. They didn't even flinch. "Run," I said. We ran. Made it maybe 50 yards before one of them got in front of us, moving faster than anything had a right to move. It reached out with arms that were too long, fingers that ended in black claws, and grabbed Lisa by the throat. "Pretty," it said, tilting its head like a bird studying a worm. "Young. Lots of meat on the bones." I swung my flashlight at its head, putting all my weight behind it. The metal cracked against its skull with a sound like breaking glass, and for a second the thing let go of Lisa and staggered backward. "The truck!" I yelled, and we ran again. This time we made it to Elle, Ice's cruiser, before they caught up. She had the engine running and the doors locked when all 3 of them surrounded the vehicle, pressing their faces against the windows and leaving smears of something dark and wet on the glass. "Let us in," one of them said, its voice muffled by the glass. "We just want to talk." Its hand left a perfect print on the window, 5 fingers, but each one had too many joints, bending in ways that made my stomach turn. Lisa put the car in reverse and floored it, but the snow was too deep and the tires just spun. We were stuck. "The radio," I said. "Call for backup." Lisa grabbed the handset and tried to raise the dispatcher, but all we got was static. The things outside were laughing again, tapping on the windows with their claws, making sounds like fingernails on a chalkboard. "No signal," she said. "We're cut off." That's when I remembered something from Dr. Chen's notebook, the scratching sounds coming from inside the sealed mine. If these things could pass through solid matter like they were ghosts, then maybe they could go places that should have been impossible. "The mine," I said. "They're coming from inside the mine." One of the creatures pressed its face against my window, its yellow eyes staring right into mine. "Michael Sutherland," it said, and somehow it knew my name. "Son of Thomas Sutherland, we remember your father." My blood went cold. My father died in a cave-in 20 years ago. "Died screaming," the thing said. "Died hungry, just like you will." It raised one clawed hand and brought it down on the windshield. The glass spider-webbed but didn't break. Yet. "The old mining office," Lisa said. "It's got a generator, thick walls. If we can make it there..." Another blow to the windshield. This time cracks spread all the way across. "Go," I said. We kicked open the doors at the same time and ran for the mining office. The crew Auteurs right behind us, their laughter echoing off the empty buildings. I could hear them gaining ground, their footsteps making no sound in the snow, but their breathing getting closer and closer. Lisa made it to the door first and yanked it open. I dove through just as claws raked across my back, tearing through my coat and into the skin underneath. We slammed the door and threw the deadbolt, then dragged a filing cabinet in front of it for good measure. Outside, the things were scratching at the walls, testing the windows, looking for a way in. But the mining office had been built solid. Thick walls, small windows with heavy glass, steel-reinforced doors. For now, we were safe. "You're back," Lisa said, and I could feel warm blood soaking into my shirt. "I'll live," I said, though the scratches burned like fire. "Question is, for how long?" That's when we found the fourth member of Dr. Chen's team. The body was in the corner of the mining office, covered by an old tarp. At first glance, it looked like somebody had just thrown a blanket over a pile of bones, but when Lisa pulled back the canvas, we saw what was left of Lisa Torres, the team's geologist. Most of her was gone. What remained had been picked clean, like something had taken its time with the meal. But her face was still intact, frozen in an expression of absolute terror. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, and her mouth was stretched wide like she'd died screaming. "Jesus," Lisa whispered, and I could hear her fighting not to throw up. But it wasn't the body that made my blood run cold. It was what was written on the wall above it, scratched into the concrete with something sharp. "The hunger grows." Below that, in the same jagged letters, "They came for us in the dark, made us eat, made us change, made us hungry for more." And at the bottom, in handwriting, I recognized from Dr. Chen's notebook, "We're sorry. We couldn't stop it." The scratching outside was getting louder, more insistent. Through the small window, I could see shapes moving in the darkness, testing the walls, looking, for weaknesses. "What are they?" Lisa asked. I thought about the stories my grandfather used to tell, the ones I'd dismissed as folklore and superstition, about the Wendigo, the cannibal spirits that haunted the deepest parts of the forest, about how hunger could drive men to do things that changed them forever. "You remember the mine disaster in 1965, I said. 31 miners trapped in the deepest shaft for 4 days. Lisa nodded. "What if they didn't all die right away? What if some of them were still alive down there with no food, no water, no way out? What if they got so hungry that they—" I didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. "Cannibalism," Lisa said. "That's just a story." "Is it? Look around you. Look at what happened to Dr. Chen's team." The scratching stopped. For a moment, there was absolute silence outside, like the whole world was holding its breath. Then something spoke from right outside the window. "Michael." It was my father's voice, exactly like I remembered it. "Michael, son, I'm hurt. I need help." I knew it wasn't really him. Knew he'd been dead for 20 years. But hearing that voice, the way he used to call for me when I was a kid, made my chest tighten up with old grief and guilt. "Don't listen," Lisa said, but her voice sounded far away. "I've been waiting for you down here," my father's voice continued. "Waiting in the dark. It's cold, son. So cold and so hungry." I walked toward the window like I was sleepwalking, my hand reaching for the latch. "Mike!" Lisa grabbed my arm, and the sound of her voice snapped me back to reality. Outside, the thing that was wearing my father's voice laughed. "Almost had you," it said. And now it sounded like the creature again, all gravel and wind. That's when the lights went out. The generator had been running steady since we'd gotten inside, but now it sputtered and died, leaving us in complete darkness except for the weak beam of our flashlights. The creatures outside started laughing again, a sound like breaking glass and dying animals. "They cut the fuel line," Lisa said. "Something hit the front door so hard that the whole building shook. Then again, the filing cabinet we'd pushed against it scraped across the floor." "Back door," I said. We made our way through the office in the dark, using our flashlights to navigate around desks and equipment. Behind us, the front door was starting to splinter. The back door was solid steel, but when I tried the handle, it was unlocked. We stepped out into the alley behind the building, and for a moment I thought we were clear. Then I saw the mine entrance, maybe 100 yards away. The concrete seal that had been intact for 20 years was broken open, cracked down the middle like an eggshell, and coming up out of that hole in the ground were more shapes, tall and wrong and hungry. Dozens of them. The mine, Lisa breathed. They're all coming out of the mine. That's when I understood. The disaster in 1965 hadn't killed the miners. It had changed them, turned them into something else, something that could survive in the dark and cold for decades, feeding on whatever stumbled into their territory. Dr. Chen's team hadn't just gotten lost in the storm. They'd been hunted, infected, transformed. And now, they were part of the pack. The truck, I said. If we can make it to the truck. One of the creatures stepped into the alley behind us, blocking our escape route. In the light from my flashlight, I could see its face clearly for the first time. It had been Dr. Chen. I could still see traces of the woman she'd been in the shape of the skull, the color of her hair. But everything else was wrong. Her skin was gray and stretched tight, her eyes glowed yellow, and her mouth was full of those sharp, filed teeth. "Michael," she said in a voice like rustling leaves, "you came back for us." That was kind. "Sarah," I said, trying to reach whatever part of her was still human. "Fight it. You don't have to be two. His." She tilted her head, considering. "But I'm so hungry," she said. "And you look so warm." She took a step toward us, and I did the only thing I could think of. I pulled out the emergency flare from my belt and popped it. Red light flooded the alley, and Dr. Chen Thing screamed and staggered backward, raising her hands to shield her eyes. "The light," Lisa said. "It hurts them." I threw the flare as hard as I could toward the mine entrance, and for a moment all the creatures scattered, retreating from the bright red glow. We ran for the truck, while they were distracted, but I knew we only had minutes before the flare burned out. Lisa got the engine started while I scraped ice off the windshield with my bare hands. Behind us, the creatures were regrouping, moving around the edges of the flare's light like wolves circling a campfire. "Drive," I said, jumping into the passenger seat. Lisa hit the gas and we roared out of town, sliding and fishtailing on the icy road but somehow keeping control. In the rearview mirror, I could see them chasing us. Dozens of tall shapes running through the snow at impossible speed, their eyes glowing like stars in the darkness. But even as fast as they were, they couldn't keep up with the truck. One by one, they fell behind, until finally we were alone on the mountain road with just the sound of the engine and our own ragged breathing. We drove in silence for maybe 20 minutes before Lisa finally spoke. "We have to report this," she said. "Tell people what's up there." I thought about that. Thought about trying to explain Wendigos and cannibal miners to the state police. Thought about the questions, the investigations, the people who'd want to go up there and see for themselves. "Who's going to believe us?" I said. "We have evidence. The notebook, the bodies." "What bodies? By the time anybody gets up there, those things will have cleaned up the mess, hidden the evidence. And then they'll be waiting for the next team, the next group of people who get trapped by a storm and need shelter." Lisa was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "So what do we do?" I looked back toward Colwood, toward the mountains that held secrets older than any of us could imagine. "We make sure nobody else goes up there," I said. "Ever." It took 3 months and a lot of favors, but I managed to get Colwood Hollow declared an environmental hazard zone. Officially, the old mines were leaking toxic gases that made the area unsafe for human habitation. The access roads were closed permanently, warning signs posted every 100 yards, and the whole area was fenced off with razor wire. Lisa backed up my story, though I could see in her eyes that she was still trying to make sense of what we'd experienced. The official report listed Dr. Chen's team as missing, presumed dead due to exposure during the February blizzard. Their bodies were never found. Some nights, I wake up thinking about that hunger Dr. Chen wrote about in her notebook. Not regular hunger, something deeper, older, that gnaws at your soul and changes who you are. I understand now why the Native Americans told stories about the Wendigo. It wasn't just a monster, it was a warning. There are places in these mountains where hunger lives, where desperation and starvation can twist human beings into something else entirely. Places where the line between civilization and savagery is thinner than we like to admit. I still do my job, still check the abandoned mines and make sure they're sealed up tight. But I pay closer attention to the stories now, the old tales that folks used to tell around fires on cold nights. Because I've learned that some legends exist for a reason. Last winter, I got reports of missing hikers near an abandoned mining town called Centralia, about 60 miles north of Coalwood. The search teams found their equipment scattered around the old mine shafts, but no bodies, just tracks in the snow that got longer and stranger the deeper. They went into the mountains. I recommended that area be closed too. Sometimes I think about Dr. Chen and her team, about the choice they faced in those final days. Starve to death in the cold, or eat the unthinkable, and become something that could survive forever. I wonder if any part of them is still aware, still human, trapped inside those twisted forms that hunt the darkness. I hope not. But on the coldest nights, when the wind howls through the mountains like voices calling from the deep, I think I can hear them up there in Coalwood Hollow, waiting for the next storm, the next group of travelers who might need shelter in an abandoned mining town. The hunger never dies. It just waits, and it's always growing. If you ever find yourself driving through the mountains of West Virginia and you see signs warning you away from Coalwood Hollow, pay attention to them. Some places are closed for good reasons. Some hungers are better left unfed. And if you're ever caught in a blizzard up there, whatever you do, don't seek shelter in the old mining towns. Find a tree, dig a snow cave, freeze to death if you have to, because freezing is quick. What waits in those abandoned mines is not. My name is Michael Sutherland, and this is the truth about what happened in Coalwood Hollow. I've carried this secret for 40 years now, and it's time somebody else knew, just in case I don't make it through the next winter. The hunger is calling again. My name is Jonathan Ashford, and I've been a ranger in the North Georgia mountains for 16 years. Before that, I spent 12 years as a detective with Atlanta PD, working homicide cases that would make most people sick. I thought I'd seen everything humans could do to each other. I was wrong. I moved to the mountains after my partner got killed in a drug bust gone bad. Couldn't handle the city anymore. All that concrete and noise and death. The Chattahoochee National Forest offered me peace, or so I thought. Blood Mountain is the highest peak on the Appalachian Trail in Georgia, standing at 4,458 feet. The Cherokee used to call it Slaughter Mountain because of all the tribal wars fought there. Local folks say the ground is cursed. I never believed in that stuff. Skinwalkers, ghosts, curses. That was all nonsense to a former cop like me. Evidence and facts. That's what mattered. October 1981 was strange from the start. The weather stayed warm when it should have been cooling down. The leaves hadn't changed color yet, which made everything feel off. Even the animals seemed restless. I'd been working the trail maintenance between Neal's Gap and Blood Mountain Shelter when the call came in. "John, we got a body up on the trail." That was Sheriff Morrison from Union County. "Hiker found him this morning near the summit. You need to get up there now." I grabbed my gear and hiked the 2 miles to the scene. The victim was Marcus Webb, 26 years old, from Marietta. His body was arranged in a perfect circle of rocks, arms spread wide, facing north. Someone had carved symbols into the trees around him, Cherokee-looking marks that made my skin crawl. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was Marcus's face. It looked peaceful, like he was sleeping. No signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, nothing that suggested he'd fought back. His backpack sat next to him, untouched. Wallet still had cash and credit cards. "What do you think, John?" Morrison asked. He was a good sheriff, but had never worked a murder case. I knelt beside the body, pulling on latex gloves. 16 years in law enforcement had taught me to look for details others missed. "No robbery motive. Killer took time to arrange the scene. This is personal." That's when I noticed the footprints. Human shoes leading up to the body, then nothing. Just animal tracks leading away. Raccoon prints, then deer, then something I couldn't identify. Like whoever killed Marcus had vanished into thin air. "Get me the state boys," I told Morrison. "And the FBI if they'll come. This isn't normal." I took photos with my camera, making notes in my pad. The symbols on the trees looked fresh, carved recently with something sharp. The arrangement of rocks was too perfect to be random. Someone had spent time here, planning this. As I worked the scene, the forest around us grew quiet. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the wind stopped blowing. The silence pressed down like a weight. "You feel that?" Morrison whispered. I did. Something watching us from the trees. I'd had that feeling before, back in Atlanta, when walking into gang territory. The hair on your arm stands up, and your gut tells you to run. But I was a professional. I kept working, bagging evidence and taking measurements. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone up there. That something in those woods was studying us, learning about us. When we finally hiked back down, I was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the climb. That night, I called my old partner from Atlanta PD. "Tommy, you ever work a scene where nothing made sense?" "All the time, John." "Why?" "Got a murder up here. Killer left tracks that just disappear." Tommy laughed. "Maybe your mountain man learned to fly." But it ain't funny. Not when you'd seen Marcus Webb's peaceful face and felt those eyes watching from the forest. Something was wrong on Blood Mountain, and I had a feeling this was just the beginning. The FBI sent Dr. Sandra Kellerman, a profiler from their Atlanta office. She was smart, maybe 40 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. We met at the ranger station the next morning. "Tell me about the scene," she said, studying my photos. I walked her through everything, the body placement, the symbols, the strange footprints. She listened without interrupting, making notes in a leather folder. "The killer has knowledge of Cherokee traditions," she said finally. "These symbols are protective wards used to contain spirits, but they're carved backwards, which reverses their meaning. So instead of keeping spirits in, they let them out?" "Something like that." She looked up at me. "You said the footprints just stopped. Changed. From human boots to animal paws. Different animals." Dr. Kellerman frowned. "That's unusual. Could someone have prepared fake tracks?" "Maybe. But the depth and spacing looked natural. Like whatever made them was actually changing as it walked." She closed her folder. "Show me the scene." We hiked up to Blood Mountain summit in the afternoon. The October sun felt too warm, and the air was thick like before a storm. Dr. Kellerman examined everything I'd found, taking her own photos and measurements. "The victim knew his killer," she said. "No defensive wounds, no signs of fear. Marcus Webb trusted whoever did this. That's what bothers me. How do you get someone to lie down peacefully while you arrange rocks around them? Drugs, maybe? Or..." She hesitated. "Or what?" "In my experience, people only cooperate like this when they believe they're helping someone they care about. Family member, close friend, lover. But Marcus Webb had been hiking alone. His family said he didn't know anyone in Georgia except a few trail acquaintances. So who had he trusted enough to die for? That's when he barred the scream. It came from the north, down toward Slaughter Creek. High-pitched, terrified, cutting through the forest like a knife. Dr. Kellerman and I looked at each other, then grabbed our gear and ran. We found Jennifer Price at the bottom of a ravine, 23 years old, from Tennessee. She'd been hiking south on the trail when someone attacked her. Like Marcus, she showed no defensive wounds. But unlike Marcus, Jennifer's skin had been removed from her arms and face with surgical precision. "Jesus Christ," Dr. Kellerman whispered. I'd seen plenty of bodies in Atlanta, but nothing like this. The killer had taken Jennifer's skin like a trophy, leaving her flesh exposed but not mutilated. The cuts were clean, professional, made by someone who knew anatomy. "This isn't a normal serial killer," I said. "No, this is something else entirely." We called in the Georgia Bureau of Investigation and cordoned off the area. While waiting for the crime scene team, I walked the perimeter, looking for clues. That's when I saw him. A man stood at the edge of the clearing, maybe 50 yards away. He wore a plaid shirt and jeans, looked like any other hiker. But something was wrong with his face. It didn't fit right, like a mask that was too big. "Hey!" I called out. "Police, stay where you are." The man turned toward me and I saw what was wrong. He was wearing someone else's skin over his own face. Jennifer Price's face, stretched and distorted, but recognizable. I reached for my radio to call Dr. Kellerman, but when I looked back, the man was gone. Just empty forest where he'd been standing. "Did you see that?" I asked when she joined me. "See what?" I told her about the man in the plaid shirt, about Jennifer's face stretched over his own. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "John, trauma can cause hallucinations. You've been under a lot of stress." But I knew what I'd said. "Ian." The killer was still here, somewhere in these woods, wearing his victim's skin like clothing. And if I was right, he wasn't finished hunting. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside my cabin made me reach for the pistol on my nightstand. Twice I got up to check the doors and windows. Something was out there in the darkness, watching and waiting. Around 3 a.m, my phone rang. "Ranger Ashford? This is Marcus Webb." I sat up in bed, fully awake. "Who is this?" "It's Marcus. I need help. I'm lost on the trail near Blood Mountain. Can you come find me?" The voice was perfect. Exactly how Marcus had sounded when I'd interviewed his family. But Marcus Webb was dead. I'd seen his body myself. "Where are you calling from?" I asked. "Pay phone at Neal's Gap. Please, I'm scared. There's something in the woods with me." The line went dead. I sat in the darkness, gun in my hand, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. Either someone was playing a sick joke or something impossible was happening on my mountain. I never went to Neal's Gap that night, but I couldn't stop thinking about Marcus's voice, so real and frightened. Whatever was killing people on Blood Mountain, it wasn't human, and it was getting smarter. 3 days later, it hit a family. Tom and Sarah Mitchell from North Carolina had been camping at Blood Mountain Shelter with their 12-year-old daughter, Amy. Other hikers found Tom and Sarah in the morning, skinned like Jennifer Price. Amy was missing. The GBI set up a command center at Neal's Gap. They brought in search dogs, helicopters, and 50 volunteers to comb the forest. Dr. Kellerman coordinated with local police while I guided search teams through the backcountry. "The killer's escalating," she told me during a break. "Taking more risks, targeting multiple victims. Something's driving the behavior." "Any leads on Amy?" "Nothing. It's like she vanished." I'd been thinking about the phone call from Marcus. How the killer had known exactly how he sounded, even mimicked his speech patterns. That took more than just hearing someone talk. It required intimate knowledge of their personality. "What if the killer isn't just taking skin?" I asked. "What do you mean?" "What if he's taking their memories too, their entire identity?" Dr. Kellerman stared at me. "That's not possible, John. 3 days ago I would have agreed. But we're dealing with someone who can change their footprints mid-stride and disappear into thin air. Maybe impossible is relative." That afternoon, while searching near Slaughter Creek, I found Amy's backpack. Inside was her journal filled with drawings of animals, bears, wolves, deer. But on the last page, she'd drawn something that made my blood freeze. It was a man wearing another person's face like a mask, with clawed hands reaching toward the viewer. At the bottom, in a child's handwriting, "The skin stealer is coming." I radioed Dr. Kellerman immediately. Found Amy's pack. She knew something was hunting her. "Any sign of the girl?" "Negative, but I think she ran. There's a trail of small footprints heading deeper into the wilderness." I followed Amy's trail for 2 miles, moving carefully through dense forest. The tracks were erratic, showing she'd been running in panic. Several times, I found places where she'd hidden behind rocks or under fallen logs. The trail ended at an old Cherokee sacred site, a natural stone circle near a spring. Local tribes had used it for ceremonies before being forced out in the 1800s. Amy's footprints led right to the center of the circle, then stopped. No other tracks led away. It was like she'd just disappeared. I was photographing the scene when I heard Amy's voice behind me. "Mr. Ashford, can you help me?" I spun around. Amy Mitchell stood at the edge of the clearing, looking exactly like her school photo. Blonde hair, blue eyes, pink hiking clothes. But something was wrong with how she moved, too stiff and careful. "Amy, thank G. You're safe. Where have you been?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I got lost. There's a man in the woods wearing my daddy's face." I keyed my radio while walking slowly toward Bow. Her base, "This is Ashford. Found Amy Mitchell at the Cherokee site. She's alive." "That's wonderful news," Dr. Kellerman's voice crackled through the speaker. But as I got closer, I could see what was wrong. Amy's skin didn't fit right around her neck and wrists. It was stretched too tight in some places, wrinkled in others, like someone wearing a costume that was the wrong size. "Amy, I need you to stay right there, okay?" She tilted her head at an unnatural angle. "Why? Don't you want to help me find my parents?" "Your parents are dead, Amy." Her smile never wavered. "I know. I killed them." The thing wearing Amy Mitchell's skin began to change. The face stretched and distorted, revealing something underneath that wasn't human. Clawed hands emerged from the pink sleeves of her jacket, and her eyes turned completely black. I drew my pistol, but it moved faster than anything had a right to. One moment it was 20 feet away. The next it was right in front of me, Amy's stolen face, inches from mine. "You taste like fear," it whispered in Amy's voice. "I'm going to wear you next." I emptied my clip into its chest. The bullets passed through like it was made of smoke. It laughed, Amy's innocent laugh, and disappeared into the forest. I ran back toward the command center, crashing through branches and stumbling over roots. Behind me, I could hear it following, sometimes on 2 legs, sometimes on 4, making sounds no human throat could produce. When I reached the other searchers, I was covered in scratches and breathing hard. Dr. Kellerman took one look at me and knew something was terribly wrong. "What happened to Amy?" "Amy's dead," I gasped. "Has been for days. We're dealing with something that steals identities. It can look like anyone, sound like anyone." The search team stared at me like I'd lost my mind. But Dr. Kellerman had been profiling killers for 15 years. She knew when someone was telling the truth. "Everyone back to base camp," she ordered. "No one goes anywhere alone." But as we walked back through the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was already among us, wearing one of our faces, planning its next move. The thing that lived on Blood Mountain wasn't just killing people. It was becoming them. And now it had its sights set on me. That night, Dr. Kellerman and I sat in the ranger station, going through everything we knew. She'd been making phone calls to colleagues, trying to understand what we were facing. "I talked to an anthropologist at UGA," she said. "The Cherokee have legends about creatures called skinwalkers, but those are usually associated with southwestern tribes. This is different." "Different how?" "Your Cherokee informant says there's a specific curse on Blood Mountain. Something about broken treaties and desecrated burial grounds. The creature is bound to this area. So it can't leave?" "Not permanently. But John, there's something else. The anthropologist says these entities don't just steal skin. They absorb memories, personalities, everything that makes someone who they are." That explained the phone call from Marcus and how the thing had known Amy's mannerisms perfectly. It wasn't just wearing their bodies like costumes. It was becoming them completely. "How do we stop it?" "There are purification rituals, but they require—" She stopped talking. Her eyes were fixed on something behind me. I turned around and saw myself standing in the doorway. Same uniform, same face, same scar on my left hand from a childhood accident. The other me smiled and walked into the room. "Evening, Sandra," it said in my voice. "Sorry I'm late. Had to take care of some business in the woods." Dr. Kellerman's hand moved slowly toward her weapon. "Which one of you is real?" "I am," we both said at the same time. "Me?" The fake Jonathan laughed. "This is fun. Sandra, did you know John here killed a child in Atlanta? Shot a 12-year-old during a drug raid. That's really why he left the force. That's not true, I said. But the thing knew details about my past that I'd never told anyone. Private moments, secret shames, things locked in my memory. Tell her about your partner, John. How you froze up when the shooting started. How Tommy died because you were too scared to move. Dr. Kellerman looked between us, trying to decide who was real. The creature had my memories, my voice, even my guilt. It was a perfect copy in every way that mattered. Sandra, listen to me, I said. Earlier today, you told me about your daughter, Emma. You said she was starting college at Georgia Tech. The fake me nodded. That's right. Emma's studying engineering. You don't have a daughter, I told Dr. Kellerman. You told me you never had kids because of your career. Her face went white. She drew her pistol and aimed it at the fake Jonathan. The thing wearing my face began to change. My features melted and shifted, cycling through its other stolen identities. Marcus Webb, Jennifer Price, Amy Mitchell, Tom and Sarah Mitchell. It showed me every person it had killed and absorbed. You can't stop me, it said in Amy's voice. I've been here for 200 years, feeding on travelers who disrespect the mountain. The Cherokee curse will protect me. Maybe, I said, pulling out the leather pouch I'd gotten from Joe Crow Feather, a Cherokee elder who lived near the reservation. But curses work both ways. I opened the pouch and threw white sage into the air. The creature screamed, a sound like metal tearing, and stumbled backward. Its stolen faces began peeling away like old paint. Sacred tobacco and white sage, I said, advancing on it. Joe told me how to break the binding. You're not Cherokee, are you? You're something else entirely, something that got trapped here when the tribes were driven out. The entity's true form was finally revealed, something ancient and hungry, with too many Ethan eyes like black holes. It had been feeding on human identity for centuries, but the Cherokee wards had kept it contained to this one mountain. The treaties weren't just about land, I continued, throwing more sage. They were about keeping things like you locked away from innocent people. It lunged at me with claws extended, but the sacred smoke made it weak and clumsy. I tackled it to the ground, pressing the burning sage against what might have been its chest. The creature's scream shattered every window in the ranger station. It clawed at me desperately, trying to steal my face one last time. But the ritual was working. I could see it being pulled back into whatever dark place it had come from. This isn't over, it hissed. There are others like me, older things, hungrier things. Then it was gone, leaving only the smell of burned sage and the echo of inhuman screams. Dr. Kellerman lowered her weapon, hands shaking. Is it dead? Vanished, for now. I looked at the broken windows, the claw marks on the floor. But it killed 4 people, including a little girl. That's something I have to live with. We found Amy Mitchell's body the next morning, buried in the Cherokee sacred circle. The creature had kept her alive for days, learning everything about her before finally taking her skin. She'd been 12 years old, just trying to enjoy a camping trip with her parents. The FBI classified the case as a serial killer investigation. Solved, perpetrator deceased, files sealed. Dr. Kellerman wrote a report that blamed everything on a mentally disturbed individual who'd used elaborate disguises to confuse witnesses. But she knew the truth. We both did. That was 42 years ago. I'm 85 now, retired from the Forest Service since 2003. The nightmares stopped about 20 years ago, but I still can't look at mirrors without checking to make sure my reflex matches what I expect to see. The official records say Marcus Webb, Jennifer Price, and the Mitchell family were killed by a drifter named William Hayes, who died resisting arrest. Dr. Kellerman made sure the paperwork was clean and the case stayed closed. She passed away in 2019, but we kept in touch until the end. Neither of us ever talked about what really happened on Blood Mountain, but the missing person reports never stopped. Every few years, another hiker vanishes somewhere along the Appalachian Trail corridor, Search teams find clothes, equipment, sometimes bones, never the whole person. I think the creature I banished was just one of many. The Cherokee didn't create these things. They learned to contain them. When the tribes were forced out, a lot of old knowledge went with them. Ancient wards failed, forgotten rituals were lost, and hungry things that should have stayed buried began to wake up. The Appalachian Mountains are old, older than human civilization. They've seen ice ages come and go, watched continents drift apart and crash together. In places that ancient, sometimes you find pockets where the laws of nature work differently, where things that should be myths walk around wearing human faces. I moved to a retirement community in Dahlonega after I turned 80. My cabin on Blood Mountain sits empty now, the Cherokee wards I placed around it still holding. Local hikers sometimes report strange sounds from that direction, voices calling for help, children crying in the woods. But nobody goes to investigate anymore. The Forest Service put up new signs along the trail. Stay on marked paths. Camp only in designated areas. Report unusual wildlife behavior immediately. They don't say why, but the old-timers know. Some places aren't meant for humans. If you're planning to hike the Appalachian Trail, listen to an old ranger's advice. Trust your instincts. If someone approaches you in the backcountry and something feels wrong about them, the way they move, the way they talk, the way their skin doesn't quite fit, get away immediately. Don't try. To help them. Don't feel bad about leaving them behind, because that person you're trying to help might not be a person at all. Last month I got a call from a young ranger named Sarah Chen. She's been working the Blood Mountain section for 2 years, just like I did when I was her age. Mr. Ashford, I found something I think you should know about. A hiker went missing near the Cherokee site, but we found his backpack and clothes arranged in a perfect circle, just like you described in your reports. I told her I was too old to hike anymore, but she should talk to Joe Crowfeather's grandson about getting some white sage, and if she ever sees someone who looks like the missing hiker walking around the forest, she should run. Some curses can't be permanently broken. They can only be contained, passed down from one generation to the next, guarded by people who understand the responsibility. The Cherokee called it Slaughter Mountain for a reason, and 42 years later, it's still hungry. My name is Vincent Blackthorne, and I've been a park ranger for 18 years. I work the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee, mostly around a place called Screaming Eagle Hollow. It's not a pretty name, but it fits. The Cherokee had their own name for it, something that meant the place where spirits cry out. Smart people, the Cherokee. They knew to stay away. Before I became a ranger, I worked the coal mines like my daddy and his daddy before him. That's how I learned about caves in tight spaces, how to move through rock and dirt when the world wants to crush you. My little brother Tommy worked the mines too, until the collapse in '78. They never found his body. That's when I decided I'd had enough of being underground. But funny thing about trying to escape caves, they follow you. My job as a ranger means I'm the guy they call when someone gets lost in the cave systems that run through these mountains like old blood vessels. I've pulled 47 people out of those dark holes over the years. Broken bones, hypothermia, panic attacks, you name it. I thought I'd seen everything a cave could throw at a man. I was wrong. People around here tell stories about creatures in the mountains. Big hairy things that walk on 2 legs and scream like dying women. They call them different names. Some say Fook monster, others just call them wood apes or boogers. Mountain folks have been telling these stories for generations. I always figured it was just talk. Something to scare kids with or explain away strange sounds in the night. That was before December of 1983. The ice storm hit us hard that winter, started on a Tuesday and didn't quit for 3 days. Everything got coated in ice thick as your thumb. Power lines snapped like guitar strings. Roads became skating rinks. The whole forest turned into a crystal palace that could kill you if you weren't careful. That was when we got the call about the missing students. 6 college kids from the University of Tennessee had gone into Screaming Eagle Hollow to explore the cave system. They were part of some geology club, all bright-eyed and full of book learning about rock formations and mineral deposits. They'd gotten permits and everything, followed all the rules, Told the ranger station they'd be back by Sunday evening. Tuesday morning came and went. No sign of them. Wednesday, their professor called the sheriff. Said his students never missed classes, especially not the ones going for their PhD. These weren't party kids who'd run off to Nashville for a good time. These were serious students who loved rocks more than beer. That's when they called me. The drive to Screaming Eagle Hollow took 2 hours in good weather. With the ice, it took me 4. I had to stop 3 times to put chains on my tires, and even then I was sliding all over the place. The trees looked like they were made of glass, beautiful and deadly. Every few minutes I'd hear another one crack and fall, sounding like gunshots in the quiet. When I finally made it to the trailhead, I knew we had problems. The students' cars were still there, 3 vehicles buried under 2 inches of solid ice. Their windshields were spider-webbed from falling branches. These kids hadn't left on their own. They were still down in that cave somewhere. I radioed back to headquarters, but all I got was static. The ice storm had knocked out most of the repeater towers. I was on my own until the weather cleared and help could get through. That should have been my first warning. In 18 years of ranger work, I'd learned to trust my gut, and my gut was telling me to walk away, get back in my truck, and wait for backup. But 6 kids were missing, and every hour that passed in December, weather meant their chances got worse. So I grabbed my ear and headed for the cave. The mouth of Screaming Eagle Cave sits about half a mile down into the hollow, hidden behind a curtain of icicles that looked like prison bars. I'd been in this cave dozens of times before, mapping passages and checking for unstable rock. It was a big system, over 3 miles of mapped tunnels with probably twice that much unexplored. Plenty of places for college kids to get lost or hurt, but something was different this time. First thing I noticed were the scratches around the cave entrance. Deep gouges in the limestone, about 4 inches wide and fresh enough that the stone dust hadn't washed away yet. I'd seen bear claws before, but these were different. Deeper, more deliberate, like something had been trying to tear its way into the rock itself. I figured maybe a black bear had decided to use the cave for winter sleeping. That would explain why the students hadn't come back out. They might be trapped deeper in the system, afraid to leave until the bear moved on. Bears got cranky when you woke them up from winter sleep. The ice had made the first 100 feet of cave treacherous as hell. Everything was slick and sharp. My headlamp beam caught the ice formations and threw crazy shadows on the walls. Beautiful and dangerous, like everything else in these mountains. About 200 feet in, the ice stopped and the cave opened up into what we called the cathedral room. Big open space with rock formations that looked like church columns. This was where most cave tours ended, where families with kids would turn around and head back to daylight. But the college students had gone deeper. I found their first marker at the entrance to the Narrows, a passage that led to the deeper cave system. They'd tied a piece of orange surveyor's tape to a rock projection, just like they were supposed to. Smart kids, following safety protocols. The Narrows were tight, barely wide enough for a grown man to squeeze through sideways. I'd been through here before, but it never got easier. The rock pressed in on both sides, and you could feel the weight of the entire mountain sitting on top of you. For someone like me, who'd lost a brother in a mine collapse, it was pure torture. But it was the only way to the deeper chambers. Halfway through the Narrows, my headlamp dimmed. Fresh batteries. Checked that morning. But the light was definitely getting weaker. I tapped the side of the lamp and it brightened back up. But that had never happened before. Good equipment didn't just fail for no reason. Then I heard it. A sound echoing up from the deep caves. Low and hollow, like wind blowing through a tunnel. But there was no wind down here. No air movement at all. The sound came again, longer this time, almost like something calling out. I stopped moving and listened hard. The sound didn't repeat. Maybe it was just the mountain settling, rock adjusting to the weight of all that ice on the surface. Old caves made all kinds of noises. That's what I told myself. At the end of the Narrows, I found the second marker tape. And something else. Pieces of blue fabric caught on the rough rock. University of Tennessee, blue. The fabric was torn, not cut. Like someone had been pulled through the passage too fast to be careful. That's when I started finding the drag marks. They were subtle at first, just scrapes in the limestone floor that might have been caused by heavy equipment being pulled along. But as I followed them deeper into the cave system, they got more obvious and more disturbing. These weren't tool marks. They were gouges made by something being dragged against its will, something that had been trying to grab onto the rock to stop itself from being pulled along. The marks led into a part of the cave system I'd never fully explored, a section that dropped down at a steep angle into what the old surveys marked as unknown depth, the kind of place where smart cavers turned around and went home. But the coal, ledge kids hadn't turned around, and neither could I. I followed the drag marks for another 200 feet, moving carefully down a slope that got steeper with every step. My headlamp beam couldn't reach the bottom. It just disappeared into blackness that seemed to swallow the light. That's when I found the first body. It wasn't a whole body, just pieces. I found the student's headlamp first, crushed flat against the cave wall like someone had stepped on it with incredible force. The plastic was ground into the rock. Next to it were scraps of clothing and other things I didn't want to look at too closely. But I had to. It was my job. The name tag on the jacket piece said, Jennifer Walsh, UT Geology Deptum. She'd been a real person just 4 days ago. Someone's daughter. Someone who loved rocks and wanted to understand how the earth worked. Now she was scattered across 50 feet of cave floor. I radioed for backup, but still got nothing but static. The storm had cut me off completely. I was alone in here with whatever had done this to Jennifer Walsh. The smart thing would have been to mark the location and get out. Wait for help. Let someone else deal with whatever was hunting in these caves. But there were still 5 students missing, and they might still be alive. I kept following the drag marks deeper into the mountain. The cave system opened up again into a chamber I'd never seen before. It was huge. My headlamp couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls. The air moved differently here, like there were other passages leading off in directions I couldn't see, and it stank. The whole chamber reeked of something dead and wrong. Like meat left out in the sun, but worse, older. It was a smell that made your stomach turn over and your brain scream at you to run. I found the second student near the center of the chamber. This one was more intact, but that almost made it worse. Marcus Thompson, according to his ID. He'd been arranged, set up sitting against a rock formation with his arms spread wide, like he was welcoming visitors to his nigs. His eyes were gone, and his mouth was stuffed full of small rocks. That's when I heard the sound again, the hollow, echoing call I'd heard in the Narrows. But this time it was closer, much closer. And this time, it answered itself. 2 sounds, coming from different directions in the darkness. One low and rumbling, like a bear's growl stretched out into a song. The other higher, more like a scream that someone had taught to carry a tune. They were talking to each other. I clicked off my headlamp and crouched behind a rock formation, trying to make myself invisible. In the absolute darkness of the deep cave, I listened to the things hunt. I could hear them moving, big things, but moving carefully, quietly. The only sound was the occasional scrape of claw on stone or the soft pad of something heavy stepping carefully through the dark. They knew I was here. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I heard them move away. The sounds faded into the distance, echoing off into passages I couldn't see. I waited another 10 minutes before turning my light back on. That's when I saw the paintings. They covered the walls of the chamber, crude images drawn in something dark and sticky. Pictures of creatures with long arms and glowing eyes, hunting humans through cave passages. The paintings were old, much older than the Cherokee settlements. Some ancient people had been here before, had met these things and tried to warn others. The paintings told a story. Humans entering the caves, the creatures taking them one by one. And at the end, a final image that made my blood freeze. A pile of human bones carefully arranged in the deepest part of the cave. And standing over it, a creature so large and terrible that whoever painted it had used the entire wall to show its full height. 9 feet tall with arms that reached almost to the ground, covered in thick fuzz, or in standing on legs like tree trunks. But the worst part was the eyes. Even in a crude cave painting made who knows how long ago, those eyes looked intelligent, patient. These weren't just animals. They were something else. Something that could plan and think and wait. Something that had been using these caves for a very long time. I had to find the other students and get out. But as I stood up to leave, my headlamp started dimming again. And this time, tapping it didn't help. The light got weaker and weaker until I was standing in almost complete darkness, with only the faintest glow to show me where the cave walls were. That's when I heard footsteps coming back. Heavy footsteps. Moving fast. I ran. Running in a cave with a dying headlamp is like playing Russian roulette with physics. Every step could be your last if you hit a pit or a low ceiling or just trip over a rock you can't see coming. But staying put meant becoming the next arrangement in that nightmare chamber. I could hear them behind me, at least two of them, maybe more. They moved through the darkness like they owned it, which I guess they did. These caves had been their home for God knows how long. They knew every passage, every drop-off, every place where a human might try to hide. My headlamp finally gave up completely, just as I reached the entrance to the Narrows. Total darkness. The kind of black that makes you question whether your eyes are actually open. But I knew these caves too. Not as well as the creatures hunting me, but well enough. I'd been through the Narrows dozens of times. I could navigate by touch if I had to. The tight passage would slow them down if they were as big as the cave painting suggested. Maybe give me enough time to reach the surface and get help. I squeezed into the Narrows and started moving as fast as I dared. Behind me, I heard frustrated roars as the creatures tried to follow. The sound echoed through the cave system like thunder, and for a moment I thought I was safe. Then I heard something that stopped my heart. The sound of rock breaking. They were digging their way through, making the passage wider with their bare hands, tearing chunks out of solid limestone like it was wet clay. The roars got closer as they worked. I made it through the Narrows and into the cathedral room just as something massive crashed through behind me. My spare flashlight was in my pack, and I fumbled for it with shaking hands as heavy footsteps pounded across the cave floor. The flashlight beam came on just in time to show me my death walking toward me. 9 feet tall, just like in the cave paintings, covered in thick, reddish-brown fur that was matted with old blood and cave mud. Arms that hung almost to the ground, ending in hands tipped with claws that could tear through stone. And those eyes, amber-colored and glowing with their own light. Intelligence burned in those eyes. Ancient, patient, hungry intelligence. But what scared me most was that it wasn't alone. 2 more of them emerged from side passages I hadn't even known existed, smaller than the first one, but still bigger than any man. They spread out to cut off my escape routes, moving with the coordination of a pack that had hunted together for years. The big one opened its mouth and let out a sound I'll never forget. Part roar, part scream, part something else entirely. It was the sound of something that had learned to enjoy killing, that took pleasure in the fear of its prey. And then it spoke. Not words exactly, but sounds that had meaning. It was talking to the others, telling them what to do. The smaller ones moved to block the passages while the big ones stalked toward me. I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed. Not a scared scream, though I was terrified. A loud, echoing scream that bounced off the cave walls and came back from a dozen different directions. The creatures stopped, confused by the echoes. That's when I remembered something from my mining days. Sound behaved strangely in underground spaces. If you knew how to use it, you could make yourself sound like you were somewhere else entirely. I moved to a different spot and screamed, again, aiming my voice at a particular rock formation that I knew would send the echo back from the opposite side of the chamber. To the creatures, it sounded like there was someone else in the cave with us. They spread out to search for the new threat, and I kept moving, using every acoustic trick I'd learned in 18 years of cave work, making sounds that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. But it couldn't last forever. They were too smart, and they were learning my tricks. The big one figured it out first. It turned toward me with those glowing eyes and smiled. Actually smiled, like it was impressed by my cleverness but knew the game was over. It started walking toward me, and I knew I was going to die in that cave. Just like Tommy had died in the mine collapse, just like the college students had died, just like everyone who went too deep into places humans weren't meant to go. But then I heard something that changed everything. Voices. Human voices, calling my name from the cave entrance. Help had finally arrived. The creatures heard it too. The big one's head snapped toward the entrance, and it let out a roar of frustration. It looked back at me, and I saw something like regret in those ancient eyes, like it was genuinely sorry to be interrupted. Then all three of them melted back into the darkness, moving so quietly I couldn't tell which passages they'd used. One moment they were there. The next I was alone in the cathedral room with only the echo of my own breathing. Dale Morrison and Jim Hawkins found me 20 minutes later, along with a team from the county rescue squad. Dale was a fellow ranger who knew these caves almost as well as I did. Jim was a deputy sheriff who'd helped with cave rescues before. I tried to tell them what I'd found, but the words wouldn't come. How do you explain monsters to reasonable men? How do you describe creatures that shouldn't exist? We found some remains, I finally managed, in the deep chambers. The students, they're gone. Dale nodded grimly. He'd seen cave accidents before. People who got lost and died of exposure, or fell into pits, or got trapped by rock falls. He thought he understood, but he didn't. None of them did. They sealed Screaming Eagle Cave 3 days later. Official reason was structural instability caused by the ice storm. They brought in heavy equipment and filled the entrance with concrete and steel mesh. Put up signs warning people to stay away due to ongoing geological hazards. The real reason was what we found when we went back with proper lights and equipment. The deep chamber was full of bones, human bones arranged in careful patterns that spoke of intelligence and ritual. Some of the bones were old enough that they might have belonged to Cherokee who ignored their own warnings about the hollow. Others were newer. We found pieces of all 6 college students, what was left of them. We also found evidence that the cave system went much deeper than anyone had ever mapped. Passages that led down into the mountain for miles, connecting to other cave systems throughout the region. A whole underground world that we'd never suspected existed. And we found more paintings, hundreds of them, telling the story of the creatures that lived in the deep places. The Cherokee had known about them and had tried to keep people away. But settlers came and didn't listen to the warnings. The creatures had been feeding on humans for over a century, taking a few at a time, careful never to take so many that people would start hunting them seriously. Until the college students had gone too deep and found their main nesting area. That's when they'd gotten careless. I transferred to surface duties after that. Couldn't handle being underground anymore. Every time I'd to enter a cave, I'd see those glowing eyes and hear that intelligent roar that sounded almost like laughter. Dale Morrison took over as the cave rescue coordinator. He lasted 6 months before he asked for a transfer too. Said he kept hearing things in the caves that couldn't be explained by normal acoustics. Jim Hawkins started drinking heavy after that winter. He never talked about what we'd seen in the deep chamber, but sometimes when he'd had too much whiskey, he'd mention the teeth marks we'd found on some of the bones. Teeth marks too big and too purposeful to belong to any known animal. The official report listed the 6 students as victims of a cave-in caused by the ice storm. Their families got death certificates and insurance payments and the comfort of thinking their children had died quickly in an accident. The truth would have been too much to bear. But sealing one cave didn't solve the problem. The Cherokee National Forest has over 300 mapped cave systems and probably twice that many that haven't been fully explored. The creatures didn't just disappear because we plugged one hole. Local cavers started reporting strange sounds coming from other caves in the region. Howls that echoed from deep underground, especially during the winter months. Some of the more experienced cavers stopped going below the first chamber level. They'd never admit why, but word spreads in small communities. People know when something's wrong, even if they can't put a name to it. I retired early, at 53. Moved to a house in town where I could see the streetlights and hear traffic and know that I wasn't alone in the dark. But sometimes, on quiet winter nights when the wind is just right, I can still hear sounds coming from the mountains. Sounds that remind me of that voice in the deep chamber, the one that had learned to enjoy the hunt. The Cherokee were right to stay away from Screaming Eagle Hollow. They understood that some places belong to things older and more dangerous than humans, things that have been waiting in the dark places of the Wawus world since before we learned to make fire. We should have listened to their warnings. If you're ever hiking in the Appalachian Mountains and you come across a cave entrance, especially one that local people seem to avoid, remember this story. Remember Jennifer Walsh and Marcus Thompson and the 4 other students whose names got buried with the truth about how they really died. And remember that just because we've mapped most of the surface world doesn't mean we understand what lies beneath it. Some doors should never be opened. Some hollow places should be left to scream in the dark.